Ezra chapter 1. Years ago, the Lord sent Jeremiah with a message about a promise for the people of Israel. Then, in the first year that Cyrus was king of Persia, the Lord kept his promise by having Cyrus send this official message to all parts of his kingdom.
I am King Cyrus of Persia. The Lord God of heaven, who is also the God of Israel, has made me the ruler of all nations on earth. And he has chosen me to build a temple for him in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. The Lord God will watch over and encourage any of his people who want to go back to Jerusalem and help build the temple. Everyone else must provide what is needed. They must give money, supplies, and animals, as well as gifts for rebuilding God's temple.
Many people felt that the Lord God wanted them to help rebuild his temple, and they made plans to go to Jerusalem. Among them were priests, Levites, and leaders of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. The others helped by giving silver articles, gold, personal possessions, cattle, and other valuable gifts, as well as offerings for the temple. King Cyrus gave back the things that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the Lord's temple in Jerusalem, and had put in the temple of his own gods. Cyrus placed Mithredath, his chief treasurer, in charge of these things. Mithredath counted them and gave a list to Sheshbazzar, the governor of Judah. Included among them were 30 large gold dishes, 1,000 large silver dishes, 29 other dishes, 30 gold bowls, 410 silver bowls, and 1,000 other articles. Altogether, there were 5,400 gold and silver dishes, bowls, and other articles. Sheshbazzar took them with him when he and the others returned to Jerusalem from Babylonia. Ezra chapter 2. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia had captured many of the people of Judah and had taken them as prisoners to Babylonia. Now they were on their way back to Jerusalem and to their own towns everywhere in Judah. Zerubbabel, Joshua, Nehemiah, Sariah, Realiah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mispar, Bigvai, Rehum, and Baanah were in charge of the ones who were coming back. And here is a list of how many returned from each family group. 2,172 from the family of Parosh, 372 from the family of Shephatiah, 775 from the family of Arah, 2,812 descendants of Jeshua and Joab from the family of Pahath-Moab, 1,254 from the family of Elam, 945 from the family of Zattu, 760 from the family of Zakkai, 642 from the family of Bani, 623 from the family of Bebai, 1,222 from the family of Azgad, 666 from the family of Adonikam, 2,056 from the family of Bigvai, 454 from the family of Adin, 98 from the family of Ater, also known as Hezekiah, 323 from the family of Bezai, 112 from the family of Jorah, 223 from the family of Hashem, and 95 from the family of Gibbar. Here is how many people returned whose ancestors had come from the following towns: 123 from Bethlehem, 56 from Netophah, 128 from Anathoth, 42 from Asmaveth, 743 from Kiriatharim, Kephirah, and Beeroth, 621 from Ramah and Geba, 122 from Michmas, 223 from Bethel and Ai, 52 from Nebo, 156 from Magbish, 1,254 from the other Elam, 320 from Haram, 725 from Lod, Hadid, and Ono, 345 from Jericho, and 3,630 from Sanea. Here is a list of how many returned from each family of priests. 973 descendants of Jeshua from the family of Jediah, 1,052 from the family of Immer, 1,247 from the family of Pashur, and 1,017 from the family of Haram. And here is a list of how many returned from the families of Levites. 74 descendants of Hodaviah from the families of Jeshua and Kadmiel. 128 descendants of Asaph from the temple musicians, and 139 descendants of Shallum, Ater, Telman, Akub, Hatita, and Shobai from the temple guards. Here is a list of the families of temple workers whose descendants returned: Ziha, Hasupha, Tabaoth, Kiros, Siaha, Padan, Labana, Hagabah, Akub, Hagab, Shamlai, Hanan, Gittel, Gehar, Reiah, Rezin, Nekoda, Gazam, Uzzah, Hosea, Besai, Asna, Meunim, Nephisim, Bakbuk, Hakupha, Harher, Basluth, Mahida, Harsha, Barkos, Sisera, Tema, Neziah, and Hatipha. Here is a list of Solomon's servants whose descendants returned: Sotai, Hassaphareth, Peruda, Jaela, Darkon, Giddel, Shephatiah, Hattel, Pokereth-Hazzebaim, and Amai. A total of 392 descendants of temple workers and of Solomon's servants returned. There were 652 who returned from the families of Deliah, Tobiah, and Nekoda, though they could not prove that they were Israelites. They had lived in the Babylonian towns of Tel Melah, Tel Harsha, Kerub, Adon, and Immer. The families of Habiah, Hakaz, and Barzillai could not prove that they were priests. The ancestor of the family of Barzillai had married the daughter of Barzillai from Gilead and had taken his wife's family name. But the records of these three families could not be found, and none of them were allowed to serve as priests. In fact, the governor told them,
"You cannot eat the food offered to God until we find out if you really are priests."
There were 42,360 who returned, in addition to 7,337 servants and 200 musicians, both women and men. They brought with them 736 horses, 245 mules, 435 camels, and 6,720 donkeys. When the people came to where the Lord's temple had been in Jerusalem, some of the family leaders gave gifts so it could be rebuilt in the same place. They gave all they could, and it came to a total of 1,030 pounds of gold, 5,740 pounds of silver, and 100 robes for the priests. Everyone returned to the towns from which their families had come, including the priests, the Levites, the musicians, the temple guards, and the workers. Ezra chapter 3. During the 7th month of the year, the Israelites who had settled in their towns went to Jerusalem. The priest Joshua, son of Jozadak, together with the other priests, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and his relatives, rebuilt the altar of Israel's God. Then they were able to offer sacrifices there by following the instructions God had given to Moses. And they built the altar where it had stood before, even though they were afraid of the people who were already living around there. Then every morning and evening they burned sacrifices and offerings to the Lord. The people followed the rules for celebrating the Festival of Shelters and offered the proper sacrifices each day. They offered sacrifices to please the Lord, sacrifices at each new moon festival, and sacrifices at the rest of the Lord's festivals. Every offering the people had brought was presented to the Lord. Although work on the temple itself had not yet begun, the people started offering sacrifices on the Lord's altar on the first day of the 7th month of that year. King Cyrus of Persia had said the Israelites could have cedar trees brought from Lebanon to Joppa by sea. So they sent grain, wine, and olive oil to the cities of Tyre and Sidon as payment for these trees, and they gave money to the stoneworkers and carpenters. During the 2nd month of the 2nd year after the people had returned from Babylonia, they started rebuilding the Lord's temple. Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Joshua, son of Jozadak, the priests, the Levites, and everyone else who had returned started working. Every Levite over 20 years of age was put in charge of some part of the work. The Levites in charge of the whole project were Joshua and his sons and relatives, and Kadmiel and his sons from the family of Hodaviah. The family of Henadad worked along with them. When the builders had finished laying the foundation of the temple, the priests put on their robes and blew trumpets in honor of the Lord, while the Levites from the family of Asaph praised God with cymbals. All of them followed the instructions given years before by King David. They praised the Lord and gave thanks as they took turns singing,
"The Lord is good! His faithful love for Israel will last forever!"
Everyone started shouting and praising the Lord because work on the foundation of the temple had begun. Many of the older priests and Levites and the heads of families cried aloud because they remembered seeing the first temple years before. But others were so happy that they celebrated with joyful shouts. Their shouting and crying were so noisy that it all sounded alike and could be heard a long way off. Ezra, chapter 4. The enemies of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin heard that the people had come back to rebuild the temple of the Lord God of Israel. So they went to Zerubbabel and to the family leaders and said,
"Let us help. Ever since King Esarhaddon of Assyria brought us here, we have worshipped your God and offered sacrifices to him."
But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the family leaders answered,
"You cannot take part in building a temple for the Lord our God. We will build it ourselves, just as King Cyrus of Persia commanded us."
Then the neighboring people began to do everything possible to frighten the Jews and to make them stop building. During the time that Cyrus was king, and even until Darius became king, they kept bribing government officials to slow down the work. In the first year that Xerxes was king, the neighboring people brought written charges against the people of Judah and Jerusalem. Later, Bishlam, Mithredath, Tabeel, and their advisers got together and wrote a letter to Artaxerxes when he was king of Persia. It was written in Aramaic and had to be translated. A letter was also written to Artaxerxes about Jerusalem by Governor Rehum, Secretary Shimshai, and their advisers, including the judges, the governors, the officials, and the local leaders. They were joined in writing this letter by people from Iraq and Babylonia, the Elamites from Susa, and people from other foreign nations that the great and famous Ashurbanipal had forced to settle in Samaria and other parts of Western Province. This letter said,
"Your Majesty, King Artaxerxes, we are your servants from everywhere in Western Province, and we send you our greetings. You should know that the Jews who left your country have moved back to Jerusalem and are now rebuilding that terrible city. In fact, they have almost finished rebuilding the walls and repairing the foundations. You should also know that if the walls are completed and the city is rebuilt, the Jews won't pay any kind of taxes, and there will be less money in your treasury. We are telling you this because you have done so much for us, and we want everyone to respect you. If you look up the official records of your ancestors, you will find that Jerusalem has constantly rebelled and has led others to rebel against kings and provinces. That's why the city was destroyed in the first place. If Jerusalem is rebuilt and its walls completed, you will no longer have control over Western Province."
King Artaxerxes answered,
Greetings to Governor Rehum, Secretary Shimshai, and to your advisors in Samaria and other parts of Western Province. After your letter was translated and read to me, I had the old records checked. It is true that for years Jerusalem has rebelled and caused trouble for other kings and nations. And powerful kings have ruled Western Province from Jerusalem and have collected all kinds of taxes. I want you to command the people to stop rebuilding the city until I give further notice. Do this right now, so that no harm will come to the kingdom.
As soon as this letter was read, Governor Rehum, Secretary Shimshai, and their advisers went to Jerusalem and forced everyone to stop rebuilding the city. The Jews were forced to stop work on the temple and were not able to do any more building until the year after Darius became king of Persia. Ezra chapter 5. Then the Lord God of Israel told the prophets Haggai and Zechariah to speak in his name to the people of Judah and Jerusalem, and they did. So Zerubbabel the governor and Joshua the priest urged the people to start working on the temple again, and God's prophets encouraged them. Governor Tattenai of Western Province and his assistant Shethar-Bozenai got together with some of their officials. Then they went to Jerusalem and said to the people,
Who told you to rebuild this temple? Give us the names of the workers.
But God was looking after the Jewish leaders. So the governor and his group decided not to make the people stop working on the temple until they could report to Darius and get his advice. Governor Tattenai, Shethar-Bozenai, and their advisers sent a report to Darius, which said,
King Darius, we wish you the best. We went to Judah, where the temple of the great God is being built with huge stones and wooden beams set in the walls. Everyone is working hard and the building is going up fast. We asked those in charge to tell us who gave them permission to rebuild the temple. We also asked for the names of their leaders so that we could write them down for you. They claimed to be servants of the God who rules heaven and earth. And they said they were rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago by one of Israel's greatest kings. We were told that their people had made God angry, and he let them be captured by Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king who took them away as captives to Babylonia. Nebuchadnezzar tore down their temple, took its gold and silver articles, and put them in the temple of his own god in Babylon. They also said that during the first year Cyrus was king of Babylonia, he gave orders for God's temple to be rebuilt in Jerusalem, where it had stood before. So Cyrus appointed Sheshbazzar, governor of Judah, and sent these gold and silver articles for him to put in the temple. Sheshbazzar then went to Jerusalem and laid the foundation for the temple, and the work is still going on. Your Majesty, please have someone look up the old records in Babylonia and find out if King Cyrus really did give orders to rebuild God's temple in Jerusalem. We will do whatever you think we should.
Ezra chapter 6. King Darius ordered someone to go through the old records kept in Babylonia. Finally, a scroll was found in Ecbatana, the capital of Media province, and it said,
This official record will show that in the first year Cyrus was king, he gave orders to rebuild God's temple in Jerusalem so that sacrifices and offerings could be presented there. It is to be built 90 feet high and 90 feet wide, with 1 row of wooden beams for each 3 rows of large stones. The royal treasury will pay for everything. Then return to their proper places the gold and silver things that Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple and brought to Babylonia.
King Darius sent this message.
Governor Tattenai of Western Province and Shethar-Bozenai, you and your advisers must stay away from the temple. Let the Jewish governor and leaders rebuild it where it stood before, and stop slowing them down. Starting right now, I am ordering you to help the leaders by paying their expenses from the tax money collected in Western Province. And don't fail to let the priests in Jerusalem have whatever they need each day so they can offer sacrifices to the God of heaven. Give them young bulls, rams, sheep, as well as wheat, salt, wine, and olive oil. I want them to be able to offer pleasing sacrifices to God and to pray for me and my family. If any of you don't obey this order, a wooden beam will be taken from your house and sharpened on one end. Then it will be driven through your body, and your house will be torn down and turned into a garbage dump. I ask the God who is worshipped in Jerusalem to destroy any king or nation who tries either to change what I have said or to tear down his temple. I, Darius, give these orders, and I expect them to be followed carefully.
Governor Tatnai, Shethar-bozenai, and their advisors carefully obeyed King Darius. With great success, the Jewish leaders continued working on the temple, while Haggai and Zechariah encouraged them by their preaching. And so the temple was completed at the command of the God of Israel and by the orders of King Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes of Persia. On the 3rd day of the month of Adar, in the 6th year of the rule of Darius, the temple was finished. The people of Israel, the priests, the Levites, and everyone else who had returned from exile were happy and celebrated as they dedicated God's temple. 100 bulls, 200 rams, and 400 lambs were offered as sacrifices at the dedication. Also 12 goats were sacrificed as sin offerings for the 12 tribes of Israel. Then the priests and Levites were assigned their duties in God's temple in Jerusalem, according to the instructions Moses had written. Everyone who had returned from exile celebrated Passover on the 14th day of the first month. The priests and Levites had gone through a ceremony to make themselves acceptable to lead in worship. Then some of them killed Passover lambs for those who had returned, including the other priests and themselves. The sacrifices were eaten by the Israelites who had returned, and by the neighboring people who had given up the sinful customs of other nations in order to worship the Lord God of Israel. For 7 days they celebrated the festival of thin bread. Everyone was happy because the Lord God of Israel had made sure that the king of Assyria would be kind to them and help them build the temple. Ezra, chapter 7. Much later, when Artaxerxes was king of Persia, Ezra came to Jerusalem from Babylonia. Ezra was the son of Sariah and the grandson of Azariah. His other ancestors were Hilkiah, Shallum, Zadok, Ahitub, Amariah, Azariah, Meraioth, Zerahiah, Uzai, Bukai, Abishua, Phinehas, Eleazar, and Aaron the high priest. Ezra was an expert in the law that the Lord God of Israel had given to Moses, and the Lord made sure that the king gave Ezra everything he asked for. Other Jews, including priests, Levites, musicians, the temple guards, and servants, came to Jerusalem with Ezra. This happened during the 7th year that Artaxerxes was king. God helped Ezra, and he arrived in Jerusalem on the 1st day of the 5th month of that 7th year, after leaving Babylonia on the 1st day of the 1st month. Ezra had spent his entire life studying and obeying the law of the Lord and teaching it to others. Ezra was a priest and an expert in the laws and commands that the Lord had given to Israel. One day, King Artaxerxes gave Ezra a letter which said,
"Greetings from the great King Artaxerxes to Ezra the priest, and expert in the teachings of the God of heaven. Any of the people of Israel, or their priests or Levites in my kingdom, may go with you to Jerusalem if they want to. My 7 advisors and I agree that you may go to Jerusalem and Judah to find out if the laws of your God are being obeyed. When you go, take the silver and gold that I and my advisors are freely giving to the God of Israel, whose temple is in Jerusalem. Take the silver and gold that you collect from everywhere in Babylonia. Also take the gifts that your own people and priests have so willingly contributed for the temple of your God in Jerusalem. Use the money carefully to buy the best bulls, rams, lambs, grain, and wine. Then sacrifice them on the altar at God's temple in Jerusalem. If any silver or gold is left, you and your people may use it for whatever pleases your God. Give your God the other articles that have been contributed for use in his temple. If you need to get anything else for the temple, you may have the money you need from the royal treasury. Ezra, you are a priest and an expert in the laws of the God of heaven, and I order all treasurers in Western Province to do their very best to help you. They will be allowed to give as much as 7,500 pounds of silver, 500 bushels of wheat, 550 gallons of wine, 550 gallons of olive oil, and all the salt you need. They must provide whatever the God of heaven demands for his temple, so that he won't be angry with me and with the kings who rule after me. We want you to know that no priests, Levites, musicians, guards, temple servants, or any other temple workers will have to pay any kind of taxes. Ezra, use the wisdom God has given you and choose officials and leaders to govern the people of Western Province. These leaders should know God's laws and have them taught to anyone who doesn't know them. Everyone who fails to obey God's law or the king's law will be punished without pity. They will either be executed or put in prison or forced to leave their country, or have all they own taken away.
Because King Artaxerxes was so kind, Ezra said, "Praise the Lord God of our ancestors." He made sure that the king honored the Lord's temple in Jerusalem. God has told the king, his advisors, and his powerful officials to treat me with kindness. The Lord God has helped me, and I have been able to bring many Jewish leaders back to Jerusalem. Ezra, chapter 8.
Artaxerxes was king of Persia when I led the following chiefs of the family groups from Babylonia to Jerusalem: Gershom of the Phinehas family, Daniel of the Ithamar family, Hattush, son of Shechaniah of the David family, Zechariah, and 150 other men of the Parosh family who had family records, Elihoenai, son of Zerahiah, with 200 men of the Pahath Moab family, Shechaniah, son of Jehaziel, with 300 men of the Zattu family, Ebed, son of Jonathan, with 50 men of the Adin family, Jeshaiah, son of Athaliah, with 70 men of the Elam family, Zebediah, son of Michael, with 80 men of the Shephatiah family, Obadiah, son of Jehiel, with 218 men of the Joab family, Shalamith, son of Josephiah, with 160 men of the Bani family, Zechariah, son of Bebai, with 28 men of the Bebai family, Johanan, son of Hakatan, with 110 men of the Azgad family, Eliphalet, Jeuel, Shemaiah, who returned sometime later with 60 men of the Adonikam family, Uthai, and Zachar with 70 men of the Bigvai family. I brought everyone together by the river that flows to the town of Ahava, where we camped for 3 days. Not one Levite could be found among the people and priests. So I sent for the leaders, Eleazar, Ariel, Shemaiah, Elnathan, Jareb, Elnathan, Nathan, Zechariah, and Meshullam. I also sent for Joiarib and Elnathan, who were very wise. Then I sent them to Iddo, the leader at Casiphia, and I told them to ask him and his temple workers to send people to serve in God's temple. God was kind to us, and had them send a skillful man named Sherebiah, who was a Levite from the family of Mahli. 18 of his relatives came with him. We were also sent Hashabiah and Jeshaiah from the family of Merari, along with 20 of their relatives. In addition, 220 others came to help the Levites in the temple. The ancestors of these workers had been chosen years ago by King David and his officials, and they were all listed by name. Beside the Ahava River, I asked the people to go without eating and to pray. We humbled ourselves and asked God to bring us and our children safely to Jerusalem with all our possessions. I was ashamed to ask the king to send soldiers and cavalry to protect us against enemies along the way. After all, we had told the king that our God takes care of everyone who truly worships him, but that he gets very angry and punishes anyone who refuses to obey. So we went without food and asked God himself to protect us, and he answered our prayers. I chose 12 of the leading priests, Sherebiah, Hashabiah, and 10 of their relatives. Then I weighed the gifts that had been given for God's temple, and I divided them among the 12 priests I had chosen. There were gifts of silver and gold, as well as the articles that the king, his advisors and officials, and the people of Israel had contributed. In all, there were 25 tons of silver, 100 silver articles weighing 150 pounds, 7,500 pounds of gold, 20 gold bowls weighing 270 ounces, and 2 polished bronze articles as valuable as gold. I said to the priests, "You belong to the Lord, the God of your ancestors, and these things also belong to him. The silver and gold were willingly given as gifts to the Lord. Be sure to guard them and keep them safe until you reach Jerusalem. Then weigh them inside God's temple in the presence of the chief priests, the Levites, and the heads of the Israelite families." The priests and Levites then took charge of the gifts that had been weighed, so they could take them to the temple of our God in Jerusalem. On the 12th day of the first month, we left the Ahava River and started for Jerusalem. Our God watched over us, and as we traveled along, he kept our enemies from ambushing us. After arriving in Jerusalem, we rested for 3 days. Then on the 4th day, we went to God's temple, where the silver, the gold, and the other things were weighed and given to the priest Meremoth, son of Uriah. With him were Eleazar, son of Phinehas, and the 2 Levites, Jozabad, son of Jeshua, and Noadiah, son of Binnui. Everything was counted, weighed, and recorded. Those who had returned from exile offered sacrifices on the altar to the God of Israel. 12 bulls were offered for all Israel. 96 rams and 77 lambs were offered on the altar, and 12 goats were sacrificed for the sins of the people. Some of those who had returned took the king's orders to the governors and officials in Western Province. Then the officials did what they could for the people and for the temple of God.
Ezra, chapter 9.
Later the Jewish leaders came to me and said,
"Many Israelites, including priests and Levites, are living just like the people around them. They are even guilty of some of the horrible sins of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. Some Israelite men have married foreign women and have let their sons do the same thing. Our own officials and leaders were the first to commit this disgusting sin. And now God's holy people are mixed with foreigners."
This news made me so angry that I ripped my clothes and tore hair from my head and beard. Then I just sat in shock until time for the evening sacrifice. Many of our people were greatly concerned and gathered around me because the God of Israel had warned us to stay away from foreigners. At the time of the evening sacrifice, I was still sitting there in sorrow with my clothes all torn. So I got down on my knees, then lifted my arms and prayed. "I am much too ashamed to face you, Lord God. Our sins and our guilt have swept over us like a flood that reaches up to the heavens. Since the time of our ancestors, all of us have sinned. That's why we, our kings, and our priests have often been defeated by other kings. They have killed some of us and made slaves of others. They have taken our possessions and made us ashamed, just as we are today. But for now, Lord God, you have shown great kindness to us. You made us truly happy by letting some of us settle in this sacred place and by helping us in our time of slavery. We are slaves, but you have never turned your back on us. You love us, and because of you, the kings of Persia have helped us. It's as though you have given us new life. You let us rebuild your temple and live safely in Judah and Jerusalem. Our God, what can we say now? Even after all this, we have disobeyed the commands that were given to us by your servants the prophets. They said the land you are giving us is full of sinful and wicked people who never stop doing disgusting things. And we were warned not to let our daughters and sons marry their sons and daughters. Your prophets also told us never to help those foreigners, or even let them live in peace. You wanted us to become strong and to enjoy the good things in the land, then someday to leave it to our children forever. You punished us because of our terrible sins, but you did not punish us nearly as much as we deserve, and you have brought some of us back home. Why should we disobey your commands again by letting our sons and daughters marry these foreigners who do such disgusting things? That would make you angry enough to destroy us all. Lord God of Israel, you have been more than fair by letting a few of us survive. But once again, our sins have made us ashamed to face you.
Ezra, chapter 10. While Ezra was down on his knees in front of God's temple, praying with tears in his eyes and confessing the sins of the people of Israel, a large number of men, women, and children gathered around him and cried bitterly. Shechaniah, son of Jehiel, from the family of Elam, said,
Ezra, we have disobeyed God by marrying these foreign women. But there is still hope for the people of Israel if we follow your advice and the advice of others who truly respect the laws of God. We must promise God that we will divorce our foreign wives and send them away together with their children. Ezra, it's up to you to do something. We will support whatever you do, so be brave.
Ezra stood up and made the chief priests, the Levites, and everyone else in Israel swear that they would follow the advice of Shechaniah. Then Ezra left God's temple and went to spend the night in the living quarters of Jehohanan, son of Eliashib. He felt sorry for what the people had done, and he did not eat or drink a thing. The officials and leaders sent a message to all who had returned from Babylonia and were now living in Jerusalem and Judah. It told them to meet in Jerusalem within 3 days, or else they would lose everything they owned and would no longer be considered part of the people that had returned from Babylonia. 3 days later, on the 20th day of the 9th month, everyone from Judah and Benjamin came to Jerusalem and sat in the temple courtyard. It was a serious meeting, and they sat there, trembling in the rain. Ezra the priest stood up and said,
You have broken God's law by marrying foreign women, and you have made the whole nation guilty. Now you must confess your sins to the Lord God of your ancestors and obey him. Divorce your foreign wives and don't have anything to do with the rest of the foreigners who live around here.
Everyone in the crowd shouted,
You're right, we'll do what you say. But there are so many of us, and we can't just stay out here in this downpour. A lot of us have sinned by marrying foreign women, and the matter can't be settled in only a day or two.
Why can't our officials stay on in Jerusalem and take care of this for us? Let everyone who has sinned in this way meet here at a certain time with leaders and judges from their own towns. If we take care of this problem, God will surely stop being so terribly angry with us.
Jonathan, son of Asahel, and Josiah, son of Tikvah, were the only ones who objected, except for the 2 Levites, Meshullam and Shabbathai. Everyone else who had returned from exile agreed with the plan. So Ezra the priest chose men who were heads of the families, and he listed their names. They started looking into the matter on the first day of the 10th month, and they did not finish until the first day of the first month of the next year. Here is a list of the priests who had agreed to divorce their foreign wives and to sacrifice a ram as a sin offering: Maaseiah, Eleazar, Jarib, and Gedaliah, from the family of Joshua, son of Jozadak, and his brothers; Hanani and Zebediah, from the family of Immer; Maaseiah, Elijah, Shemaiah, Jehiel, and Uzziah, from the family of Haram; Elioenai, Maaseiah, Ishmael, Nathanael, Jozabad, and Elasa, from the family of Pashur. Those Levites who had foreign wives were Jozabad, Shimei, Kiliah, also known as Kelita, Pethahiah, Judah, and Eleazar. Eliashib the musician had a foreign wife. These temple guards had foreign wives: Shallum, Telem, and Uri. Here is a list of the others from Israel who had foreign wives: Ramiah, Isaiah, Malchijah, Mijamin, Eleazar, Hashabiah, and Benaiah from the family of Parosh. Mattaniah, Zechariah, Jehiel, Abdi, Jeremoth, and Elijah from the family of Elam. Elioenai, Eliashib, Mattaniah, Jeremoth, Zabad, and Aziza from the family of Zatu. Jehohanan, Hananiah, Zabai, and Athli from the family of Bebai. Meshullam, Malach, Adiah, Jashub, Sheal, and Jeremoth from the family of Bani. Adnah, Kilal, Benaiah, Maaseiah, Mattaniah, Bezalel, Binnui, and Manasseh from the family of Pahath Moab. Eleazar, Ishijah, Malchijah, Shemaiah, Shimeon, Benjamin, Malach, and Shemariah from the family of Haram. Mattani, Mattata, Zabad, Eliphalet, Jeremiah, Manasseh, and Shimei from the family of Hashem. Maadai, Amram, Uel, Benaiah, Bediah, Keluhai, Benaiah, Miramoth, Eliashib, Mattaniah, Mattani, and Jeasu from the family of Bani. Shimei, Shelemiah, Nathan, Hadiah, Macnadabai, Sheshai, Sherai, Azarel, Shelemiah, Shemariah, Shallum, Amariah, and Joseph from the family of Binnui. Jeiel, Mattathiah, Zabad, Zebina, Jaddai, Joel, and Benaiah from the family of Nebo. These men divorced their foreign wives, then sent them and their children away.
The story of Joshua begins with a pivotal moment of transition in the life of the people of Israel. After 40 years wandering in the wilderness and the loss of their great leader Moses, the Israelites now stood at the threshold of the Promised Land, ready to begin the conquest that God had planned for generations. The book of Joshua marks the fulfillment of the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the moment when faith turns into action, when God's words become tangible reality. We will see how God prepared Joshua to lead this great mission, how he rallied the people, and how the first steps of the conquest began through a reconnaissance mission that would reveal not only the strength of their enemies, but also the presence of unexpected allies. This is a story about how God equips those he chooses to fulfill his purposes, even when the challenges seem insurmountable. Joshua's story opens with the report of Moses' death and God's call to Joshua. In Joshua 1:1-2 we read, "After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, 'Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites.'" With these words, God marked the beginning of a new era for Israel. Moses, the great liberator and mediator who had led the people for 40 years through the wilderness, was no longer with them. His body had been buried by God in the plains of Moab, and now it was time to move forward. Joshua, who had served Moses faithfully for years, watching and learning from his mentor, now stood alone before the greatest responsibility a man could bear, leading God's chosen people to take possession of the Promised Land. Perhaps fear and uncertainty crept into his mind. After all, how could he possibly fill the shoes of a man who spoke with God face to face? But God, who knows the human heart, did not leave Joshua without assurance. In Joshua 1:3-4, he makes a solemn declaration, reaffirming his promise concerning the land. "I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west." This wasn't just any land. It was a vast and rich territory, stretching from the Sinai Desert in the south to the mountains of Lebanon in the north, from the Mediterranean Sea in the west to the Euphrates River in the east. But land alone meant nothing without the promise of divine presence. That's why in Joshua 1:5, God adds, "No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you." This was the greatest assurance Joshua could receive. The continual presence and power of God would accompany him through every battle, every decision, and every moment of doubt. Then, 3 times, as if to underscore the importance of the message, God gives Joshua a command. First, in Joshua 1:6, "Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them." Then, in verse 7, "Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go." And finally, in verse 9, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Courage and strength were not optional for Joshua. They were divine mandates. But that courage wasn't to come from his own strength or military experience. It was to be grounded entirely in his trust in God's presence and power. And how was he to nurture that trust daily? The answer lies in Joshua 1:8. "Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful." Joshua's success would not depend solely on the sword, but on his continual meditation on God's word. The military conquest would be preceded and upheld by a spiritual conquest, the leader's daily submission to divine instruction. Encouraged and strengthened by these divine promises, Joshua did not waste time. In Joshua 1:10-11, we see his first act as leader. "So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, 'Go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own.'" The new leader proved to be decisive and practical. While God's promises formed the spiritual foundation of his leadership, Joshua knew the people also needed clear instructions and logistical preparation. 3 days. That was the time frame. Enough to gather provisions, organize equipment, and above all, mentally prepare for the monumental task ahead. Their aimless wandering was over. A clear goal now lay before them: to cross the Jordan and take hold of the land God had promised them. However, there was one specific matter to address. 2 tribes, Reuben and Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh had already received their inheritance east of the Jordan, in the territory conquered under Moses' leadership. It wouldn't be fair for them to settle while their fellow Israelites still had battles to fight. That's why in Joshua 1:12-15, Joshua addresses them directly. But to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, "Remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you after he said, 'The Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan. But all your fighting men, ready for battle, must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God is giving them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise." This was the special challenge for these tribes. Even though they had already secured their own lands, they were to keep fighting until all their fellow Israelites had received their inheritance as well. It was a core principle. The well-being of the community was to come before individual comfort. No tribe could consider itself truly blessed while others were still struggling. The response of these tribes, recorded in Joshua 1:16-18, revealed the spirit of unity that prevailed among the people. Then they answered Joshua, saying, "All that you command us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you, as he was with Moses. Anyone who rebels against your command and does not obey your words, whatever you command him, shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous." The loyalty they pledged to Joshua was the same they had once shown to Moses. They recognized in him a divinely appointed authority and committed to following him with the same devotion. Notably, the final words of their response echoed the very command God had given Joshua: "Be strong and courageous." It was as if the people were returning to their leader the same message of encouragement that God had spoken to him. In this way, a circle of trust was established. God trusted Joshua, and the people trusted him too, recognizing that God was with their leader just as he had been with Moses. With the people prepared for the crossing of the Jordan and the conquest of the land, Joshua made a strategic decision. In Joshua 2:1 we read, "Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 men as spies from Shittim, saying, 'Go, look over the land, especially Jericho.' So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there." Even though he had divine promises of victory, Joshua didn't neglect the human preparations that were still necessary. Faith in God didn't exclude prudence and strategy. The mission was kept secret. It wasn't announced to the entire camp. Only 2 men were selected, likely due to the discretion the task required. They didn't need an army to scout the land. They needed agile, observant men capable of blending in among the Canaanites without drawing attention. The specific target was Jericho, the first major fortress city the Israelites would face after crossing the Jordan. Located in a fertile region, it was known as the City of Palms and represented a strategic entry point for the conquest of the land. Its mighty walls were famous, designed to discourage any would-be invaders. If the Israelites could take Jericho, they would have opened the door to the interior of Canaan. The importance of this reconnaissance mission cannot be overstated. Before committing the entire people to battle, it was crucial to gather information about the terrain, the city's defenses, the morale of its inhabitants, and any potential weaknesses that could be exploited. Military intelligence has always been a decisive factor in warfare, and Joshua, as an experienced leader, understood this well. Interestingly, the spies didn't stay just anywhere. They went to the house of Rahab, a prostitute who lived along the city wall. At first glance, this choice might seem strange, but it was actually a strategically smart move. A prostitute's house would be a place where strangers coming and going wouldn't raise much suspicion. Moreover, because of her profession, Rahab likely had access to information and rumors from various parts of the city and neighboring regions. What the spies couldn't have anticipated was that this seemingly pragmatic choice would prove to be providential. At Rahab's house, they didn't just find temporary shelter. They found an unexpected ally who would become instrumental to the success of their mission and, later on, to the conquest of Jericho itself. The spies' stay at Rahab's house didn't go unnoticed for long. In Joshua 2:2-3, we read, "The king of Jericho was told, 'Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land.' So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, 'Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land.'" The city's surveillance systems were remarkably effective. Strangers were quickly identified as potential Israelite spies, and the information reached the king without delay. The danger was real and imminent. The spies were cornered in enemy territory, and the outcome of their mission and their lives now depended on the actions of a Canaanite woman, a prostitute they barely knew. Anyone in her position would have had every reason to turn them in and win favor with the authorities. Surprisingly, Rahab did the exact opposite. In Joshua 2:4-7, we see her cunning intervention. But the woman had taken the two men and hidden them. She said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Rahab's action was both bold and risky. First, she hid the spies on the roof of her house, under stalks of flax that were laid out to dry. An improvised but effective hiding place. Then she deliberately lied to the king's messengers, claiming the men had already left, and pointing them in a false direction toward the Jordan. Her lie was convincing enough that the pursuers left in haste to chase after the supposed fugitives. The text specifically mentions that they headed to the fords and shallow crossing points in the river. Once the city gate was closed behind them, it gave the hidden spies a crucial window of time. Rahab's actions raised some complex ethical questions. On one hand, she lied and betrayed her own people, something that under normal circumstances would be considered wrong. On the other hand, she acted out of a deep conviction about the God of Israel and his purpose in history, as we will see next. In this context, her lie can be seen as part of an act of faith, a choice to align herself with what she believed to be the right side of history, even if it meant going against her own nation. The hiding place on the rooftop, among the stalks of flax, was a seemingly small but significant detail. In ancient Middle Eastern homes, the roof was a common space used for various purposes: drying clothes, storing harvests, even sleeping on hot nights. The flax stalks, laid out to dry before being processed, provided a perfect hiding spot. Dense, enough to conceal the men, yet ordinary enough not to raise suspicion. While the pursuers chased a false lead, Rahab went up to the roof to speak with the spies. What followed was one of the most astonishing declarations of faith in the Bible. In Joshua 2:8-11, the Canaanite prostitute reveals a remarkable understanding of the God of Israel. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." This speech reveals that Rahab, though a Canaanite, recognized the power of Israel's God. She not only knew of the miraculous acts God had performed, the parting of the Red Sea and the defeat of powerful Amorite kings, but she also understood their significance. Her confession, "The Lord, your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below," was a monotheistic declaration of faith in a culturally polytheistic context. Rahab had come to believe that the God of Israel was not merely one among many, but the one true God, sovereign over all creation. Rahab also provided the spies with a crucial piece of intelligence: the psychological state of Jericho's inhabitants. "A great fear of you has fallen on us, and everyone's courage failed," were strategic insights. The reputation of the Israelites and their God had preceded them, and fear had already gripped their enemies before a single battle had taken place. The Canaanites weren't just aware of God's deeds, they were terrified by them, to the point of losing the will to fight. This was exactly the kind of information Joshua needed to hear. God had not only promised victory, he was already paving the way, weakening the enemy's resistance through fear. The battles were being won in the psychological realm even before the physical conflict began. Having made her confession of faith, Rahab made a request in Joshua 2:12-13. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. This request reveals both her faith and her familial love. She was certain Jericho would fall to the Israelites. Her concern wasn't if, but when. And her focus wasn't just on herself, but on her entire family. Even though she had broken ranks with her city, she remained loyal to her loved ones. Her plea for mercy was based on a principle of reciprocity. Just as she had shown mercy to the spies by protecting them, she asked for the same in return for herself and her family. The spies didn't hesitate to respond. In Joshua 2:14, they said, "Our lives for your lives. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." This was a solemn oath. They staked their own lives on the promise of safety for Rahab and her family, provided she kept the mission secret. With the pact made, it was time for the spies to escape. Joshua 2:15-16 gives us the details. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, "Go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way." Rahab's house was providentially located. It was built into the city wall, and its window opened to the outside, allowing for an escape route that bypassed the guarded city gates. The rope-lowering escape through the window was a practical solution for the spies, and that same window would later serve as the place for the sign that would save Rahab and her family. Rahab not only provided the means of escape, but also strategic advice. She knew the terrain and understood that the pursuers would be searching toward the east in the direction of the Jordan River. So she advised the spies to go west to the hills and hide there for 3 days, long enough for the search party to give up and return to the city. Before leaving, the spies gave Rahab specific instructions for how she and her family would be spared when the Israelites attacked. Joshua 2:17-20 records it. Now the men had said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers and all your family into your house. If any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear." The chosen sign was significant, a cord of scarlet thread, red in color, tied to the same window through which the spies had descended. This cord would be visible to the Israelite troops during the attack and would serve as a marker identifying the house to be spared. The red color was fitting, vivid and easily noticeable even from a distance. Some biblical scholars see this red cord as a foreshadowing of the blood of Christ, which would later save not just a single family, but all of humanity. Just as the blood of the Passover lamb on the doorposts had protected the Israelites during the final plague in Egypt, the red cord in Rahab's window would protect her household during the destruction of Jericho. These thematic connections between salvation and blood run throughout the biblical narrative. The terms of the agreement were clear. All of Rahab's family members had to be inside the house marked by the red cord. Anyone who left the house during the attack would not be covered by the covenant. It was a shared responsibility. The spies would guarantee the safety of everyone inside the house, but Rahab had to ensure that her whole family was gathered there at the time of the assault. Rahab readily accepted these conditions. In Joshua 2:21 we read, "Agreed," she replied, "let it be as you say." So she sent them away and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. Her prompt action in tying the cord to the window immediately demonstrates her faith in the spy's word and her conviction that the conquest of Jericho by the Israelites was imminent and certain. Following Rahab's advice, the spies headed for the mountains. Joshua 2:22 tells us, "So they left and went into the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them." The plan worked perfectly. While the pursuers searched toward the Jordan, the spies were hidden in the opposite direction in the western hills. After 3 days, when they judged it safe, they came down from the hills, crossed the river, and returned to the Israelite camp. Their return is described in Joshua 2:23-24. Then the two men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." The report they brought to Joshua was extremely positive and encouraging. It confirmed exactly what God had promised. The victory was guaranteed, not just by military strength, but because God had already gone ahead and struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. The spy mission was a complete success. The spies not only scouted the territory and returned safely, but also brought back valuable strategic insight into the psychological state of Jericho's inhabitants. Moreover, they had forged an alliance with Rahab, which would prove critical during the city's conquest. What began as a simple reconnaissance operation turned into a powerful testimony of God's sovereignty, already at work in the hearts of both the Israelites and the Canaanites, paving the way for the fulfillment of his promises. Chapter 3 of Joshua begins with the final preparations before the great crossing. In the first verse, we see, "Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over." It was a short move, but a significant one. They were leaving Shittim, their last encampment in the wilderness, and approaching the riverbank. There they stayed for 3 days, a final pause before the momentous event. During those 3 days, anticipation grew. The people could see the river, hear it, perhaps even smell the damp, lush land on the other side. The promised land was literally in sight, separated only by that flowing current. But what a current! During harvest season, the Jordan was no calm stream. It was full, overflowing, an apparently impassable barrier for such a large crowd. After 3 days, it was time to act. Joshua 3:2-4 tells us, "After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people, 'When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Do not go near it.'" The instructions were clear. They were to follow the Ark of the Covenant, keeping a respectful distance of about 1,000 meters. This distance wasn't just out of reverence, it was also practical, ensuring everyone could see the Ark, which would serve as a guide along this uncharted path. The note that "you have never been this way before" underscored that they were about to do something unprecedented, something no previous generation had experienced. But before crossing, spiritual preparation was necessary. In Joshua 3:5 we read, "Joshua told the people, 'Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you.'" Consecration was a ritual purification process that could involve washing clothes, abstaining from sexual relations, and focusing the mind and heart on God's presence. It was an acknowledgement that they were about to witness something sacred, something that required reverence and proper preparation. Finally, in Joshua 3:6, we see a specific instruction to the priests. Joshua said to the priests, "Take up the ark of the covenant and pass on ahead of the people." So they took it up and went ahead of them. It was not the warriors but the priests who would face the raging river first, carrying the ark of the covenant, the holiest symbol of God's presence among them. They would lead the way across this impossible crossing. The ark was not merely a religious symbol. It was regarded as the very throne of God on earth. Made of acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold, it contained the tablets of the law given to Moses on Mount Sinai, a portion of the manna that had sustained the people in the wilderness, and Aaron's rod that had budded. Its lid, known as the mercy seat, was adorned with 2 golden cherubim with outstretched wings. It was there, between the cherubim, that the divine presence would manifest. By placing the ark at the forefront, Joshua was visually declaring that it was God who would lead the way, who would confront the waters of the Jordan first. The people had no reason to fear because they were not advancing alone. God himself was going ahead of them. With the initial preparations complete, it was time for God to confirm Joshua's calling before all the people. In Joshua 3:7-8, the Lord speaks directly to his new leader. And the Lord said to Joshua, "This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. You shall command the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, saying, when you come to the edge of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan." This was a decisive moment for Joshua. Until now, he had been known primarily as Moses' assistant, the man who stood in the shadow of a great leader. Now, God was about to confirm him publicly, to exalt him in the eyes of the people. The miracle that was about to unfold would not only showcase God's power, but would also validate Joshua's leadership. Faithful to God's instructions, Joshua addressed the people with confidence, delivering the message he had received. In Joshua 3:9-10, he declares, "Then Joshua said to the Israelites, 'Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God.' He continued, 'This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites.'" He emphasizes that their God is not a distant or inactive deity, but a living God present among them. And this living God was about to demonstrate his power in a way that would leave no doubt about his intent to give them the promised land. The specific mention of the 7 nations, Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites, served as a reminder of God's promises and a preview of the victories to come. Next, Joshua gave specific instructions involving representatives from each tribe. In Joshua 3:12, he commands, "Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 from each tribe." These men would have a special role to play, as would be revealed later in the narrative. Finally, Joshua lays out in detail how the miracle would occur. In Joshua 3:13, he predicts, "And as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap." This precise prediction was an extraordinary act of faith. Joshua was publicly staking his credibility as a leader on a very specific supernatural event. If the waters did not part exactly as he had described, his leadership would be seriously undermined right at the beginning. But he spoke with the confidence of someone who truly believed God would fulfill his word. The mention of the waters standing up in a heap paints a vivid picture of what was about to happen. The waters flowing from the river's source would be halted, as though hitting an invisible dam, while the waters below that point would continue toward the Dead Sea, leaving a stretch of dry riverbed in the middle. With these words, the stage was set. Anticipation had reached its peak. The people, the priests, and Joshua himself waited to see whether God would truly show his power as promised. The moment of truth had come. In Joshua 3:14-15, we see the beginning of the crossing. So, when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest, yet as soon as the priests who carried the Ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the text makes a point of highlighting that the river was at its highest level, at flood stage, making the miracle even more striking. During harvest season, which fell around March and April, snowmelt from Mount Hermon caused the Jordan to swell significantly, making it far wider and deeper than at other times of the year. Priests carrying the heavy Ark of the Covenant stepped forward in faith. When their feet touched the rushing waters, something extraordinary happened, just as Joshua had predicted. In Joshua 3:16 we read, "The water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam, in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of the Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The text is geographically precise. The waters were held back as far away as the town of Adam, located about 25 kilometers, 15 miles, north of the crossing point. This meant a long stretch of the riverbed was exposed, allowing for a broad passage for the people. Adam was near Zarethan, likely at the confluence of the Jabbok and the Jordan rivers, where the valley narrows, and such a stoppage would have maximum effect. The waters downstream continued flowing naturally to the Dead Sea, gradually leaving the riverbed dry. Opposite Jericho, where the Israelites were preparing to cross, the path was now completely open. With the miraculous way cleared, the priests positioned themselves strategically. In Joshua 3:17 we read, "The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground." The image is powerful. The priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant stood still at the deepest point of the riverbed, while all the people, men, women, children, the elderly, along with flocks and belongings, passed around them. They remained there steadfast, like sentinels guarding the path opened by God. The text specifies that the riverbed was dry ground, not muddy or swampy, but completely dry, allowing for an easy and safe crossing. This made the miracle even more striking and practical. It wasn't merely a partial parting of the waters or a reduction in the current. It was a complete transformation of the terrain, turning the bed of a rushing river into a dry road. The crossing of all Israel could not have been a quick one. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, possibly more than 1 million, along with livestock and belongings. Even with a wide, dry riverbed, such a crossing likely took hours. Throughout all that time, the priests remained in position, holding the ark, symbolizing the constant presence of God who kept the waters at bay. This miracle clearly echoed the crossing of the Red Sea, which the previous generation had witnessed under Moses' leadership. Now a new generation experienced that same divine power under the leadership of Joshua. The message was clear. The same God who delivered their ancestors from slavery in Egypt was now leading them to conquer the Promised Land. Once the crossing was complete, God commanded that a memorial be created to preserve the memory of this extraordinary event. In Joshua 4:1-3, we read, When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, 1 from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests stood, and carry them over with you, and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." Now we understand the purpose behind the earlier selection of 12 men, 1 from each tribe. They were to collect 12 stones from the middle of the dry Jordan riverbed, specifically from the spot where the priests had stood with the ark, and carry them to the first campsite on Canaanite soil. These were not just any stones. They were silent witnesses of the miracle, taken from a place normally unreachable, submerged by the river's rushing waters. Joshua promptly followed God's instructions. In Joshua 4:4-7 we read, "So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, 1 from each tribe, and said to them, 'Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, "What do these stones mean?" tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." The purpose of the memorial was both educational and commemorative. The stones would serve as a starting point for conversations between generations. When children in the future, curious about this pile of stones, asked what it meant, parents would have the opportunity to recount the miracle and pass on the faith. It was a divine strategy to preserve the memory of his mighty deeds across the generations. In Joshua 4:8, we see that the command was carried out precisely, so the Israelites did as Joshua commanded. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua, and they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. In addition to the memorial that would be set up at the campsite, Joshua also established another one right in the middle of the river. Joshua 4:9 tells us, "Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan, at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood. And they are there to this day." This second memorial would usually be submerged under the river's waters, visible perhaps only during times of extreme drought, serving as an additional testimony of the miracle for future generations. Meanwhile, the priests stood firm in the middle of the river. Joshua 4:10-11 tells us, "Now the priests who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people, just as Moses had directed Joshua. The people hurried over, and as soon as all of them had crossed, the ark of the Lord and the priests came to the other side while the people watched. Only when the last Israelite had reached the western bank, only after the 12 stones had been gathered and all preparations completed, did the priests finally receive permission to leave their position in the river. They came out in order, still carrying the ark under the watchful eyes of the people. Their exit marked the end of the miracle and the return of the waters to their natural course. The crossing had been commanded and completed, with the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh fulfilling their promise to assist their fellow Israelites. Joshua 4:12-13 says, "The men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over, ready for battle in front of the Israelites, as Moses had directed them. About 40,000 armed for battle crossed over before the Lord to the plains of Jericho for war. These tribes, who'd already received their inheritance east of the Jordan during Moses' time, honored their word by helping the other tribes conquer their share of the promised land. Around 40,000 warriors from these tribes crossed the river, ready to fight alongside their brothers. The result of this entire experience was exactly what God had promised Joshua. In Joshua 4:14 we read, "That day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they had stood in awe of Moses. The miracle served to confirm Joshua as the legitimate successor to Moses, granting him the authority needed to lead the people through the upcoming conquests. Once the priests stepped out of the riverbed, the miracle ended just as dramatically as it had begun. In Joshua 4:15-18 we read, "Then the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, 'Command the priests who carry the ark of the testimony to come up out of the Jordan.' So Joshua commanded the priests, saying, 'Come up out of the Jordan.' And when the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up from the middle of the Jordan, and the soles of their feet stepped onto dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before. The waters, which had been miraculously held back, were released the moment the last priest set foot on the western bank. The Jordan resumed its flow as before, overflowing its banks as if nothing had ever happened. The miracle lasted exactly as long as it was needed, not a moment more, not a moment less. The camp was set up at Gilgal, and there the stones were arranged as a memorial. In Joshua 4:19-24 we read, "On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, 'In the future, when your children ask their parents, what do these stones mean? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, just as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God.'" The memorial at Gilgal served two purposes. Internally, it would remind the Israelites of God's power and faithfulness. Externally, it would stand as a testimony to the surrounding nations of the strength of Israel's God. The exact date of the crossing, the 10th day of the first month, was recorded, marking this historic moment in Israel's calendar. As Israel settled into its first encampment in Canaan, news of the Jordan River miracle spread rapidly, striking fear into the hearts of the land's inhabitants. In Joshua 5:1 we read, "Now when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over, their hearts melted in fear, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites." The reaction of the Canaanites is vividly described. Their hearts melted, and they lost all courage. This was more than the natural fear of a powerful enemy. It was the dread of facing a people whose God could perform such wonders. If the God of Israel could dry up a raging river, what chance did they have against such power? This widespread fear granted Israel a strategic window, a time to organize and, more importantly, to renew themselves spiritually before the battles ahead. God used this moment to command the performance of an important covenant ritual that had been neglected during the wilderness years. In Joshua 5:2-3, we read, "At that time the Lord said to Joshua, 'Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again.' So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gibeath Haraloth." Circumcision was the physical sign of the covenant between God and Abraham's descendants. It was a mark on the flesh that identified a man as a member of God's chosen people. During the 40 years of wilderness wandering, this ritual had been neglected. None of the men born after the Exodus from Egypt had been circumcised. The reason for this neglect is explained in Joshua 5:4-7. Now this is why Joshua circumcised them. All those who came out of Egypt, all the men of military age, died in the wilderness on the way after leaving Egypt. All the people that came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness during the journey from Egypt had not. The Israelites had moved about in the wilderness 40 years, until all the men who were of military age when they left Egypt had died, since they had not obeyed the Lord. For the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land he had solemnly promised their ancestors to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So he raised up their sons in their place, and these were the ones Joshua circumcised. They were still uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. This new generation, born in the desert, needed to enter into the covenant before entering into battle. It was as if God were saying, before we conquer the land, we must establish who we are, the people of the covenant. Circumcision was a physical and painful reminder of their identity and commitment to God. This mass operation must have been a significant logistical and medical endeavor. In Joshua 5:8, we read, "And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained in the camp until they were healed." The healing process required time, during which the men were temporarily unfit for combat, yet another reason why the fear paralyzing the Canaanites was so providential. The place where this ritual took place was given a special name. In Joshua 5:9 we read, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you.' So the place has been called Gilgal to this day." The name Gilgal sounds like the Hebrew word for rolled away or removed. The reproach of Egypt may refer to the state of uncircumcision, which was associated with the Egyptians, or perhaps to the general condition of shame and slavery that had defined their time in Egypt. With the circumcision complete, the Israelites were ready to celebrate their first Passover in the Promised Land. In Joshua 5:10, we read, "On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover." The date, the 14th day of the first month, was exactly as prescribed in the law of Moses. This celebration marked not only the historic deliverance from Egypt, but also the partial fulfillment of the divine promises, now that they had finally entered the land promised to their ancestors. Right after Passover, another significant shift took place in the lives of the people. In Joshua 5:11-12 we read, "The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain." The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan. For 40 years, manna had been the miraculous food that sustained Israel in the wilderness. Now, as they began to eat the produce of the land, the manna ceased. It marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. They no longer needed supernatural provision from the desert, because they could now enjoy the natural fruits of the land flowing with milk and honey. This transition from manna to the harvests of Canaan symbolized the shift from a nomadic people wandering the desert to a people finally rooted in their own land. With the covenant renewed and the people spiritually prepared, Joshua turned his attention to the immediate military challenge, the fortified city of Jericho. As he scouted the area around the city, he had a supernatural encounter that would completely shift his perspective on the battle ahead. In Joshua 5:13, we read, "Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, 'Are you for us or for our enemies?' The appearance was sudden and mysterious, a warrior with sword drawn, ready for battle. Joshua's question was direct and practical. "Are you for us or for our enemies?" As a military leader, he needed to quickly determine whether this stranger was a friend or a threat. The stranger's response in Joshua 5:14 revealed his true identity. "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" He did not identify as Israelite or Canaanite. He stood above earthly allegiances. He was the commander of the army of the Lord, a heavenly figure who hadn't come to take sides, but to take charge. His answer, neither, suggested that Joshua's question was misframed. This wasn't about choosing a human side. It was about aligning with God's divine purpose. Joshua's reaction was immediate and appropriate. He fell face down in reverence, a gesture reserved for divine worship, and placed himself in the posture of a servant, awaiting instructions. What message does my Lord have for his servant? Joshua recognized that he stood in the presence of someone worthy of worship, likely a manifestation of God himself or a high-ranking celestial being. The sacred nature of the encounter was confirmed in Joshua 5:15. The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. This command echoed the experience of Moses at the burning bush on Mount Sinai, Exodus 3:5, when God similarly told him to remove his sandals because he was standing on holy ground. By repeating this instruction, the commander of the Lord's army was establishing continuity between Moses' divine commission and Joshua's present mission. Removing one's sandals was an act of reverence and humility. Sandals, having walked through dust and dirt, symbolized worldly contamination. Taking them off acknowledged the holiness of the moment and the place. It was a symbolic shedding of impurity in preparation for receiving divine instruction. The text ends abruptly, without recording the rest of the conversation between Joshua and the commander. But the very next chapter begins with specific instructions on how to take Jericho, directions so unconventional that they clearly stemmed from this supernatural encounter. The strategy would defy all conventional military logic, making it absolutely clear that victory would come from the Lord, not from human strength or planning. This mysterious encounter served as a powerful reminder for Joshua on the eve of battle. He was not in command. He was under command, under the authority of the heavenly commander. The seemingly impenetrable walls of Jericho, which must have looked daunting up close, would pose no threat to the army of the Lord. So, with the miraculous crossing of the Jordan behind them, the covenant rituals renewed, and this divine encounter burned into Joshua's memory. Israel was now spiritually equipped to begin the conquest of the Promised Land. The stage was set for their first spectacular victory, the fall of Jericho's walls. After meeting the commander of the Lord's army, Joshua refocused on Jericho, the first city to be conquered in the Promised Land. Joshua 6:1 describes the situation. Now, Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Fear had gripped the people of Jericho. News of the miraculous crossing of the Jordan and the power of Israel's God had certainly reached them, and their response was to shut themselves behind massive walls. As Joshua considered how to attack such a heavily fortified city, the Lord spoke to him directly, revealing a battle strategy that defied all military logic. In Joshua 6:2-5, we read these surprising instructions. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the ram's horns, have all the people give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the people will go up, every man straight in." What a strange strategy. There would be no siege engines, no ladders to scale the walls, no secret tunnels. Just a procession around the city, day after day, culminating in trumpets and shouting. Militarily, it made no sense, but this was as much a spiritual battle as it was a physical one, and God wanted it to be unmistakably clear that the victory would come from him, not from human strength or tactics. Joshua accepted the divine plan without question. In Joshua 6:6-7, he relayed God's commands to the priests and the people. So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of it." And he ordered the army, "Advance, march around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord." The procession was to be led by armed men, followed by the 7 priests blowing the ram's horn trumpets. Then the Ark of the Covenant carried by other priests, and finally the rest of the people. The Ark, representing God's presence, was at the heart of this military operation. Joshua also gave specific instructions about maintaining silence during the marches. In Joshua 6:10, he commands, "But Joshua had commanded the army, 'Do not give a war cry. Do not raise your voices. Do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout.'" This silence wasn't just a tactic to surprise the enemy. It was a display of discipline and focus. It was a silence heavy with expectation and tension, like the calm before a storm. Thus began one of the most unusual sieges in military history. In Joshua 6:8-9, we read about the first day. When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark, all the while the trumpets were sounding. The scene must have been astonishing and perhaps unsettling for the inhabitants of Jericho. From atop their walls, they watched the strange procession approach, armed men marching in silence, priests blowing ram's horn trumpets, a golden ark being carried with reverence, and thousands of people walking silently behind it. Then, after one lap around the city, the whole procession simply returned to the Israelite camp. What kind of warfare was this? Joshua 6:11 records the end of the first day. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the army returned to camp and spent the night there. After completing the circuit, the Israelites didn't attack. There was no attempt to scale the walls, no shouting or taunting, just that odd procession, and then nothing. But that was just the first day. In Joshua 6:12-14, we see the same pattern repeated for 6 consecutive days. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. Imagine the growing tension inside Jericho. Each morning, the watchman would see the same procession coming. Day after day, the same silent march, the same trumpets, one full circuit around the city, and then the withdrawal with no attack. What were the Israelites planning? When would the real assault begin? The psychological strain must have been immense, with fear and anxiety building by the day. For the Israelites, those 6 days of silent marching were an exercise in faith and patience. God could have brought Jericho's walls down instantly, but he chose a process that required persistence and unwavering obedience. For 6 days they marched, watched, waited, and trusted, knowing that God would act at the right time. The ram's horn trumpets, known in Hebrew as shofar, had special significance. They were used in religious ceremonies and also as signals. In battle, their piercing sound could be heard from far away and stirred deep emotional responses. In the hands of the priests circling Jericho, they symbolized both a call to worship and a warning of coming judgment. The 7th day brought the climax of this unusual siege. But for now, at the close of the 6th day, both Jericho and Israel, were left waiting, one gripped by fear, the other by faith, for the outcome of this divine strategy. The seventh day dawned differently from the others. In Joshua 6:15 we read, "On the seventh day they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. The intensity had increased dramatically. Instead of the usual single lap, they were to circle the city 7 times, all in one day. Imagine the physical effort and endurance required. A single lap around a city like ancient Jericho was already a significant walk. 7 laps was an even greater challenge. All this while carrying weapons, the heavy Ark of the Covenant, and with trumpets sounding without pause. It was a test of stamina as much as faith. For the people of Jericho, watching from their walls, this shift in routine must have been deeply unsettling. Why were the Israelites circling so many times today? What did this escalation mean? With each completed circuit, the tension climbed higher. Finally, at the end of the 7th lap on the 7th day, the decisive moment arrived. Joshua 6:16 tells us, the 7th time around, when the priests sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." After 6 days of enforced silence, the order to shout must have come like a thunderclap. And this was no ordinary cry. It was a mighty war cry, a shout of faith and assured victory. Thousands of voices that had remained silent for nearly a week now erupted in one deafening roar. Before the shouting began, Joshua had given specific instructions about what was to be done with the city after its capture. In Joshua 6:17-19, he declares, "The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury." The city was to be placed under a ban or devotion, terms that signified total consecration to destruction. Nothing could be kept for personal use. Everything was either to be destroyed or dedicated to the Lord's treasury. The only exception was Rahab and her household, protected by the promise made by the spies. The climactic moment came, as described in Joshua 6:20, when the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed, so everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. It was a moment of pure divine power. At the sound of the trumpets and the people's shout, the mighty walls of Jericho, which had withstood countless assaults over centuries, simply crumbled. It wasn't a partial collapse or a breach in a few places. The text indicates that the walls fell completely, enabling the Israelites to march straight in, each man heading directly for the section before him. Archaeologists have debated the exact nature of this collapse. Some suggest it may have been a divinely timed earthquake. Others propose that the collective shout and trumpet blast may have caused resonant vibrations that compromised the wall's structure. Regardless of the physical mechanism, the biblical account makes it clear that this was a supernatural act, a miracle demonstrating the power of Israel's God. With the city's defenses destroyed, the Israelites faithfully carried out the divine orders. Joshua 6:21 describes the outcome. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep and donkeys. This complete destruction, known as herem in Hebrew, was a form of sacred warfare common in the ancient Near East. In Israel's context, it carried theological significance. These nations were being judged for centuries of idolatry and detestable practices, and Israel was acting as the instrument of divine justice. The land was being purified in preparation for the establishment of the covenant people. The fall of Jericho wasn't just a military victory, it was a dramatic sign that the God of Israel was fulfilling his promises and fighting on behalf of his people. The first major city of Canaan had fallen, not by military might, but by the power of faith and obedience to divine instruction, no matter how illogical it may have seemed from a human perspective. Amid the total destruction of Jericho, there was one notable exception, the house of Rahab, the woman who had hidden the Israelite spies. In Joshua 6:22-23, we see how Joshua honored the commitment made to her. Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. The two spies Rahab had protected now returned to rescue her. It was a moment of honor and gratitude, the fulfillment of a solemn promise. They didn't just save Rahab. They rescued her entire extended family, parents, siblings, and likely other relatives who had sought shelter in her home, marked by the scarlet cord. At first, they were placed outside the camp of Israel, likely in a temporary settlement. This was necessary because, as Canaanites, they were considered ritually impure and had to undergo a purification process before being fully integrated into the Israelite community. While the rest of Jericho was consumed by fire, Rahab's fate is again noted in Joshua 6:24. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. The destruction was total, but the precious metals and valuable items were preserved, not for the conqueror's personal gain, but for the Lord's treasury. This was the first fruits of the conquest, dedicated entirely to God as a recognition that it was He who had granted the victory. Rahab's final fate is revealed in Joshua 6:25. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, with her family and all, who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. After the period of purification, Rahab and her family were fully incorporated into the Israelite community. They weren't merely tolerated as resident foreigners, they became an integral part of the covenant people. The phrase, "she lives among the Israelites to this day," indicates that at the time the book of Joshua was written, Rahab's descendants were still known and recognized within the community. She left a lasting legacy, accepted not only as a resident but as a true Israelite by adoption. The New Testament sheds even more light on this woman's extraordinary destiny. In Matthew 1:5, we learn that Rahab married Salmon, an Israelite, from the tribe of Judah, and became the mother of Boaz, who would later marry Ruth. This made Rahab a direct ancestor of King David and eventually of Jesus Christ. The former Canaanite prostitute, who had shown faith in the God of Israel even before fully knowing him, was given the honor of being included in the Messiah's genealogy. In Hebrews 11:31, Rahab is listed among the heroes of faith. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And in James 2:25, she is cited as an example of faith expressed through action. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? Thus, Rahab's story presents a powerful contrast within the narrative of Jericho's conquest. While the city and its inhabitants were destroyed for their resistance to God, Rahab and her family were saved through faith and incorporated into the chosen people. She stands as a vivid example of how faith can transcend national, cultural, and even moral boundaries, allowing anyone who acknowledges and honors the true God to become part of his people. The spectacular victory at Jericho was meant to be just the beginning of a continuous series of conquests. With God clearly fighting for them, who could stand against Israel? However, Joshua chapter 7 opens on a somber note that would change the course of events. In Joshua 7:1, we read, "But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. Ashan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, took some of them, so the Lord's anger burned against Israel." One man, Achan, had disobeyed the explicit command not to take anything for himself from the spoils of Jericho. His secret disobedience would lead to disastrous public consequences, affecting the entire nation. This introductory verse acts as a forewarning, revealing to the reader what the Israelites themselves did not yet know, the cause of the catastrophe about to unfold. Unaware of the hidden sin, Joshua proceeded with his conquest plans. In Joshua 7:2-3, he turned to the next target. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth Aven to the east of Bethel, and told them, "Go up and spy out the region." So the men went up and spied out Ai. When they returned to Joshua, they said, "Not all the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there." Ai was a much smaller city than Jericho, apparently with less impressive defenses. The spies, perhaps overconfident after the miraculous victory at Jericho, recommended a limited strike. "Don't send the whole army," they said, "because the enemy is few." This advice reflected a mix of arrogance and self-reliance. They were now trusting their own military judgment instead of seeking divine guidance. Joshua accepted this advice without consulting the Lord, another sign of growing reliance on human ability over divine direction. In Joshua 7:4-5, we see the devastating consequences of that decision. So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as Shebarim and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. The result was a humiliating defeat. The same Israelites who had seen Jericho's mighty walls fall now fled in panic from a far smaller city. 36 men were killed, a relatively small number in military terms, but devastating for a people who had expected invincibility under God's protection. The people's reaction is described vividly. Their hearts melted and became like water. Fear and discouragement spread rapidly. If they couldn't defeat Ai, how could they possibly conquer the rest of the land? And even more troubling, where was the God who had promised to fight for them? Joshua's reaction was one of deep grief and confusion. In Joshua 7:6-9, we witness his anguish. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, "Alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say, now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name?" This was a spiritual crisis for Joshua. Tearing one's clothes and covering oneself in dust were traditional expressions of profound mourning and distress. Bowing face down before the ark of the Lord reflected a desperate plea for divine answers. His anguished questions revealed his fear that God had abandoned Israel, or worse, had brought them this far only to destroy them. Joshua's final concern, "What then will you do for your own great name?" demonstrates a deeper theological In sight, if Israel were destroyed, the surrounding nations would conclude that Israel's God was weak or unreliable, unable to protect his own people. God's reputation, his name, was at stake. God's response came swiftly, revealing the root cause of the disaster. In Joshua 7:10-12, the Lord said to Joshua, "Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions." That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. The problem wasn't that God had abandoned Israel. It was that Israel, through Achan's actions, had broken the covenant. The term devoted things, Hebrew herem, referred to objects set apart exclusively for God, either to be completely destroyed or consecrated for the sanctuary. Taking something herem was essentially stealing from God. God then commanded a process to identify the guilty party. In Joshua 7:13-15, he instructed, "Go consecrate the people. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, there are devoted things among you, Israel. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove them. In the morning, present yourselves tribe by tribe. The tribe the Lord chooses shall come, forward clan by clan. The clan the Lord chooses shall come forward family by family, and the family the Lord chooses shall come forward man by man. Whoever is caught with the devoted things shall be destroyed by fire, along with all that belongs to him. He has violated the covenant of the Lord and has done an outrageous thing in Israel." The process described was methodical and public, ensuring that justice was carried out openly. It began with the tribes, then moved to the families within the chosen tribe, then the households within the selected family, and finally to the individuals within the chosen household. This method, likely involving the casting of lots or the use of the Urim and Thummim, divine instruments held by the high priest, made it clear that it was God identifying the guilty party, not a human making an arbitrary accusation. The punishment, declared, was severe. The guilty person and everything they owned would be burned. This reflected the gravity of the offense, described as a folly in Israel, a Hebrew expression denoting a deeply offensive act against the moral and religious order of the community. The next morning, Joshua implemented the identification process, exactly as the Lord had commanded. In Joshua 7:16-18, we read how events unfolded. Early the next morning, Joshua had Israel come forward tribe by tribe, and the tribe of Judah was chosen. The clans of Judah came forward, and the Zerahites were chosen. He had the clan of the Zerahites come forward by families, and Zabdi was chosen. Joshua had his family come forward man by man, and Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, was chosen. Step by step, the circle tightened. First, the tribe of Judah was identified, ironically, the royal tribe from which the future King David would come. Then the Zerahite clan within Judah, then Zabdi's family, and finally Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi. The detailed genealogy underscores the exact identity of the culprit. There was no room for doubt or ambiguity. With the guilty party identified, Joshua confronted him directly, but with a surprisingly pastoral tone. In Joshua 7:19 he says, "Then Joshua said to Achan, 'My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done. Do not hide it from me.'" Notice Joshua's tone, "my son," an expression of empathy and personal connection rather than angry condemnation. He appeals to Achan to give glory to God through honest confession. This was a call to integrity, an invitation for Achan to reclaim at least a measure of honor through truth, even in the face of inevitable punishment. Achan responded with a full confession. In Joshua 7:20-21, he admits, "It is true, I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful Babylonian robe, 200 shekels of silver and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent, with the silver underneath." Achan's confession follows a classic pattern of temptation and sin. I saw, I coveted, I took. He didn't attempt to minimize or justify his actions. He openly acknowledged that he had sinned against the Lord. The items he took were significant: a fine Babylonian robe, likely a luxurious imported garment, 200 shekels of silver, a considerable sum, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, around 570 grams. These were valuable, high-status objects, clear temptations to greed and the desire for wealth. To confirm the confession, Joshua sent messengers to verify. In Joshua 7:22-23, we read, "So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and there it was, hidden in his tent with the silver underneath. They took the things from the tent, brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites, and spread them out before the Lord. The stolen goods were found exactly where Achan had said, buried in the floor of his tent, with the silver underneath." The phrase, "spread them out before the Lord," likely means the items were placed before the Ark of the Covenant, serving as both concrete evidence of the crime and recognition that these items rightfully belonged to God. With Achan's guilt confirmed, justice was carried out swiftly. In Joshua 7:24-26 we read, "Then Joshua, together with all Israel, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys and sheep, his tent and all that he had, to the valley of Achor. Joshua said, 'Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today.' Then all Israel stoned him, and after they had stoned the rest, they burned them. Over Achan they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. Therefore that place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since." The punishment was severe and total. Not only Achan, but his entire family and possessions were destroyed. This collective judgment may seem unjust to modern sensibilities, but it reflected the ancient understanding of familial solidarity. In that cultural context, the family was seen as a unified whole, sharing in both blessings and consequences. Moreover, it's likely that Achan's family was aware of the theft. After all, the stolen items were hidden in their shared tent. The method of execution was twofold: stoning followed by burning, as previously prescribed. Stoning was a communal form of execution involving the collective participation of the people. Afterward, a large heap of stones was raised over the site as a permanent memorial, not to honor Achan, but to serve as a lasting reminder of the consequences of disobedience. The name given to the site, Valley of Achor, is significant. Achor in Hebrew means trouble or disaster, echoing Joshua's words. "Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today." Achan's case would serve as a lasting reminder that individual actions carry collective consequences and that covenant with God demanded complete obedience. The final line of the account, "Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger," indicates that the punishment had achieved its purpose. Justice had been served, the community's sanctity restored, and the relationship between God and Israel repaired. The path was now clear to resume the conquest of the land. With Achan's sin removed from the camp and the relationship with God restored, it was time to return to battle. This time, however, the approach would be very different. In Joshua 8:1-2, God encourages Joshua and reveals a new strategy. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai. For I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush behind the city." This new approach differed from the conquest of Jericho in two key ways. First, there would be no miraculous collapse of walls. Instead, they would use conventional military tactics, specifically ambush. Second, this time the Israelites were allowed to take the spoils and livestock for themselves, a sharp contrast to the previous command to destroy everything in Jericho. Joshua meticulously planned the operation. In Joshua 8:3-8, he puts God's strategy into motion. So Joshua and the whole army moved out to attack Ai. He chose 30,000 of his best fighting men and sent them out at night with these orders. Listen carefully. You are to set an ambush behind the city. Don't go very far from it. All of you be on the alert. I and all those with me will advance on the city, and when the men come out against us as they did before, we will flee from them. They will pursue us until we have lured them away from the city, for they will say, "They are running away from us as they did before." So when we flee from them, you are to rise up from ambush and take the city. The Lord your God will give it into your hand. When you have taken the city, set it on fire. Do what the Lord has commanded. See to it. You have my orders. The plan was brilliant. A main group, led by Joshua, would stage a frontal assault and then pretend to retreat, exactly as they had done in their earlier failed attempt. This would draw the defenders out of the city, leaving it exposed. Meanwhile, a hidden force of 30,000 men would be waiting in ambush behind Ai, ready to strike. Once the city was left defenseless, Joshua positioned the troops carefully. In Joshua 8:9 we read, "Then Joshua sent them off, and they went to the place of ambush and lay in wait between Bethel and Ai, to the west of Ai. But Joshua spent that night with the people. The exact location of the ambush, between Bethel and Ai, west of the city, is emphasized to show the precision of the planning and Joshua's attention to geographical detail. The next morning, the plan was put into action. In Joshua 8:10-13, we see the final preparations. Early the next morning, Joshua mustered his army, and he and the elders of Israel marched before them to Ai. The entire army that was with him marched up and approached the city. They camped north of Ai, with a valley between them and the city. Joshua had taken about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai, to the west of the city. So the soldiers took up their positions, with the main camp to the north of the city and the ambush to the west of it. That night Joshua went into the valley. This passage reveals additional tactical layers not mentioned in the earlier description. Apparently, in addition to the 30,000 men in the main ambush force, Joshua also placed 5,000 men in a secondary ambush. This could have been a reserve unit or a security force meant to block potential reinforcements from Bethel, a nearby city, that might have allied with Ai. The battle unfolded exactly as planned. In Joshua 8:14-17, we read the defenders' reaction. When the king of Ai saw this, he and all the men of the city hurried out early in the morning to meet Israel in battle at a certain place overlooking the Arabah. But he did not know that an ambush had been set against him behind the city. Joshua and all Israel let themselves be driven back before them, and they fled toward the wilderness. All the men of Ai were called to pursue them, and they pursued Joshua and were lured away from the city. Not a man remained in Ai or Bethel who did not go after Israel. They left the city open and went in pursuit of Israel. Joshua's tactic worked flawlessly. Seeing the Israelite army appear to repeat the same pattern of attack and retreat as before, the king of Ai and his men confidently rushed out to pursue them. The text emphasizes that not a man remained in Ai or Bethel, highlighting the total success of the ruse. The city was left completely unguarded. With the defenders away, Joshua gave the signal to strike. In Joshua 8:18-19 we read, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, Hold out toward Ai the javelin that is in your hand, for into your hand I will deliver the city." So Joshua held out toward the city the javelin that was in his hand. As soon as he did this, the men in the ambush rose quickly from their position and rushed forward. They entered the city and captured it and quickly set it on fire. Joshua's act of stretching out his spear toward the city served as a visible signal to the ambush force, likely monitored by watchmen waiting for that exact moment. They rushed out from hiding, entered the now empty city, and set it ablaze, creating a rising column of smoke that could be seen from far away. When the men of Ai looked back, they realized they had fallen into a trap. In Joshua 8:20-22, we read the conclusion of the battle. When the men of Ai looked back and saw the smoke of the city rising into the sky, they had no chance to escape in any direction. The Israelites, who had been fleeing toward the wilderness, had turned back against their pursuers. For when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city and that smoke was going up from it, they turned around and attacked the men of Ai. Those in the ambush also came out of the city against them, so that they were caught in the middle, with Israelites on both sides. Israel cut them down, leaving them neither survivors nor fugitives. Caught between Joshua's main force, now turning back toward them, and the ambush unit coming out of the burning city, the warriors of Ai were completely surrounded. There was nowhere to flee, and the result was a decisive and total victory for Israel. The king of Ai was captured alive, set aside for special treatment. In Joshua 8:23-29, we read the conclusion of the battle. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. When Israel had finished killing all the inhabitants of Ai in the open country, where they had pursued them, and when they were all fallen by the edge of the sword until they were destroyed, all Israel returned to Ai and struck it down with the edge of the sword. And all who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back his hand with which he stretched out the javelin until he had devoted all the inhabitants of Ai to destruction. Only the livestock and the spoil of that city Israel took as their plunder according to the word of the Lord that he commanded Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a permanent heap of ruins, as it is to this day, and he hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening. At sunset, Joshua gave the command, and they took his body down from the tree, threw it at the entrance of the city gate, and raised over it a great heap of stones, which remains to this day. The destruction of Ai was total. Every one of its 12,000 inhabitants, precisely counted in the text, was killed. The city was burned and turned into a perpetual ruin. The king received particularly humiliating treatment. He was hanged on a tree or wooden stake as a public demonstration of his defeat. At sunset, following the Mosaic law which prohibited leaving a body hanging overnight, Deuteronomy 21:22-23, his corpse was taken down and buried under a large heap of stones at the city gate. Unlike Jericho, this time the Israelites were allowed to take the livestock and the spoils for themselves, according to the word of the Lord. This showed that the earlier prohibition was not a universal principle for every conquest, but rather a specific command for the first fruits of the conquest, which was Jericho. The victory over Ai restored Israel's confidence and reaffirmed that God was still with them. The previous defeat had been due to disobedience, not divine abandonment. With Achan's sin removed from the camp and their relationship with God restored, Israel was now ready to continue the conquest of the Promised Land. The account of eyes. Vol illustrates an important spiritual principle. Divine forgiveness is real and complete, but it doesn't remove the need for wisdom, planning, and human effort. God didn't repeat the miracle of Jericho. Instead, he blessed Joshua's conventional military strategy. Both victories came from God, but through different means, a reminder that God works in diverse ways to fulfill his purposes. After the victories at Jericho and Joshua led the people in a significant moment of spiritual renewal. In Joshua 8:30-31, he built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. An altar of uncut stones, on which no iron tool had been used. This altar, made of stones untouched by human tools, preserved the purity of worship as God had previously commanded through Moses. On this altar, Joshua offered two types of sacrifices: burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. Burnt offerings were completely consumed by fire, symbolizing total dedication, while peace offerings were partially eaten in a communal meal, representing fellowship with God and among the people. The next step in the ceremony involved the Word of God. In Joshua 8:32, there in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses. These were not the same stones as the altar, but specially prepared stones coated with lime to provide a smooth surface for writing. This permanent inscription of the law marked the land as governed by divine principles. The ceremony continued with a powerful display involving the entire nation. Joshua 8:33 describes their arrangement. All Israel, with their elders, officials, and judges, were standing on both sides of the ark, half of them in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal. The people were split between the two mountains, forming a natural amphitheater, with the Ark of the Covenant in the valley between them, just as Moses had commanded. The climax of the ceremony came when Joshua read the law aloud to all the people. In Joshua 8:34-35, he read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived among them. No one was excluded from this covenant renewal, emphasizing that everyone needed to understand the terms under which they would live in the Promised Land. This ceremony demonstrated that the purpose of the conquest was not merely territorial expansion, but the establishment of a society built on God's law. Even in the midst of ongoing military campaigns, the Israelites paused to reaffirm their spiritual commitment, highlighting that obedience to God was the foundation of their mission. As Israel renewed its covenant with God, news of their victories began to spread, prompting different reactions among the inhabitants of Canaan. In Joshua 9:1-2, most of the local kings decided to form a military coalition to oppose the invaders. They gathered together to wage war against Joshua and Israel. However, one group chose a different approach. The inhabitants of Gibeon, a confederation of 4 cities, Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim, resorted to cunning rather than confrontation. In Joshua 9:3-6, they resorted to a ruse and came as ambassadors from a distant land, bringing worn-out sacks, old wineskins, cracked and mended. They wore old patched sandals, and all the bread they took for the journey was dry and moldy. This elaborate disguise had a clear goal: to trick the Israelites into making a peace treaty, something forbidden with the peoples of Canaan, but permitted with distant nations. The Israelites were initially skeptical. In Joshua 9:7, they asked, "But perhaps you live near us, so how can we make a treaty with you?" But the Gibeonites persisted with a convincing story. referencing historical events in Joshua 9:9-13 that suggested a limited knowledge of Israel's activities. They spoke of the Exodus and the victories over Sihon and Og, but notably made no mention of the recent conquests of Jericho and Joshua, and the leaders made a crucial mistake, as identified in Joshua 9:14. They sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. Relying solely on physical evidence and human judgment, they made a peace treaty sealed with a solemn oath. Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. 3 days later, the truth came to light. In Joshua 9:16-17, they heard that they were neighbors living near them and discovered that Gibeon was only a few miles away. The people reacted with outrage. The whole assembly grumbled against the leaders, but the oath had to be honored. The leaders explained their reasoning in Joshua 9:19. "We have given them our oath by the Lord, the God of Israel, and we cannot touch them now." As a compromise, the Gibeonites were sentenced to perpetual servitude. In Joshua 9:21-23, they became woodcutters and water carriers for the whole assembly, specifically for the house of my God. Though arduous, this labor kept them close to the center of Israelite worship. The Gibeonites accepted their fate, openly revealing their motivation in Joshua 9:24. "We feared for our lives because of you, and that is why we did this." This episode illustrates the consequences of making decisions without seeking divine guidance, even when the evidence seems clear, as well as how God can incorporate human error into his greater plan. The alliance between Israel and Gibeon sparked an immediate and hostile response from neighboring kings. In Joshua 10:1-5, Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, led a coalition with 4 other kings from Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon to attack Gibeon. Their motivation was clear: fear that other cities might follow Gibeon's example, since it was described as an important city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all its men were good fighters. Finding themselves surrounded by this powerful coalition, the Gibeonites sent an urgent plea to Joshua in Joshua 10:6. "Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us." This was the first true test of the newly formed alliance, and Joshua responded swiftly, mobilizing his entire army, including all the best fighting men. Before setting out, Joshua received divine assurance of victory in Joshua 10:8. "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." Encouraged by this promise, he led an impressive overnight march, described in Joshua 10:9. After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. This journey, approximately 30 kilometers with an ascent of about 1,000 meters, showcased extraordinary resolve and commitment to the alliance. The resulting battle ended in a resounding victory for Israel, marked by 2 remarkable divine interventions. First, in Joshua 10:11, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them from the sky. More of them died from the hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. Then came one of the most extraordinary miracles in the Bible. In Joshua 10:12-13, realizing the day would end before the victory was complete, Joshua said to the Lord, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Aijalon." So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. The text underscores the exceptional nature of this event. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since. Whether understood as a literal cosmological event or a poetic depiction of an extraordinarily productive day in battle, this clearly highlights God's direct intervention on Israel's behalf. As Joshua 10:14 concludes, "Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. During the chaotic retreat of the Amorite armies, their 5 kings fled and sought refuge. In Joshua 10:16-17, they fled and hid in the cave at Makkedah, but their hiding place was discovered and reported to Joshua. Joshua's response demonstrated strategic thinking. Instead of halting the pursuit of the enemy, he ordered in Joshua 10:18-19, "Roll large rocks up to the mouth of the cave and post some men there to guard it. But don't stop. Pursue your enemies." The kings were temporarily contained while the main battle continued. This tactic led to a complete victory, described in Joshua 10:20 as a great slaughter until they were wiped out. The psychological impact across the region was immense. No one dared to say a word against the Israelites, a Hebrew idiom meaning no one dared to oppose them. With the enemy army defeated, Joshua turned his attention to the captured kings. In Joshua 10:22-25, he commanded, "Open the mouth of the cave and bring those 5 kings out to me." When they were brought out, Joshua summoned the military commanders and said, "Come here and put your feet on the necks of these kings." This humiliation ritual, common in the ancient Near East, symbolized total domination. Joshua used the moment to encourage his troops, declaring, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, be strong and courageous. This is what the Lord will do. To all the enemies you are going to fight." The ceremony was both a symbol of victory and a visual lesson that God would deliver all of Israel's enemies into their hands. After the ritual, the kings were executed. Joshua 10:26-27 recounts, "Joshua struck and killed them and hung them on 5 trees, and they were left hanging until evening. At sunset, they threw them into the cave where they had been hiding. At the mouth of the cave, they placed large rocks, which remain to this day. Their temporary hiding place thus became their permanent tomb. This victory marked only the beginning of a broader southern campaign." In Joshua 10:28-42, we read a list of successive conquests. That same day, Joshua took Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, Debir. These conquests spanned the entire region, from the coastal plain to the hill country of Judah, and from north of Jerusalem to the southern area of Kadesh Barnea. Joshua 10:40-42 summarizes the campaign. So Joshua subdued the whole region, the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills and the mountain slopes, together with all their kings. He left no survivors. All these kings and their lands Joshua conquered in one campaign, because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. The southern campaign was a complete success, establishing Israelite control over a significant portion of Canaan. As southern Canaan fell under Israelite control, the kings of the north formed an even more powerful coalition. In Joshua 11:1-5, Jabin, king of Hazor, took the lead, sending messengers to various other northern kings. The result was a massive military alliance. They came out with all their armies, a multitude as numerous as the sand on the seashore, and with very many horses and chariots. All these kings joined forces and encamped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. This coalition represented a formidable military challenge, far greater than anything Israel had faced before. The text strongly emphasizes their numbers, as numerous as the sand, and their advanced military technology, very many horses and chariots, which Israel did not possess. In the face of this intimidating army, God once again encouraged Joshua. In Joshua 11:6, the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them over to Israel slain. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots." The promise came with specific instructions for dealing with the enemy's technological advantage. Render the horses useless and destroy the war chariots by fire. Joshua responded with a bold military tactic. In Joshua 11:7, Joshua and his whole army came upon them suddenly at the waters of Merom and attacked them. Rather than waiting passively for an assault from the superior force, Joshua launched a surprise attack, demonstrating both initiative and courage. The strategy worked. Joshua 11:8-9 recounts, "And the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. They defeated them and pursued them until no survivors were left. Joshua did to them as the Lord had directed. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots." After defeating the coalition, Joshua turned his attention to Hazor, the city of the king who had organized the alliance. In Joshua 11:10-11, Joshua took Hazor and struck down its king with the sword, for Hazor had formerly been the head of all those kingdoms. They put to the sword all who were in it, destroying them completely. There was not a single soul left alive, and he burned Hazor with fire. The total destruction of Hazor, one of the largest and most influential cities in Canaan, delivered a decisive blow to Canaanite power in the north. The other cities of the coalition received different treatment. In Joshua 11:12-15, we read that Joshua captured all the cities of these kings and struck them down with the sword, destroying them completely. But Israel did not burn any of the cities built on their mounds, except Hazor alone. This distinction, burning only Hazor while preserving the structures of the other cities, was a practical one, allowing the Israelites to occupy and use the conquered cities. The text repeatedly emphasizes that Joshua meticulously followed the divine instructions passed down through Moses. As the Lord commanded his servant Moses, so Moses commanded Joshua, and Joshua did it. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses. The final verses of Joshua 11 provide a broad summary of the entire conquest campaign under Joshua's leadership. In Joshua 11:16-17, we see the geographical extent of the conquests. So Joshua took all that land, the hill country, all, the Negev, all the land of Goshen, the western foothills, the Arabah, the hill country of Israel and its foothills, from Mount Halak that rises toward Seir to Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon below Mount Hermon. This description covers nearly all of Canaan, from south to north, from the coastal plains to the highlands. The text also notes the prolonged nature of the campaign in Joshua 11:18. Joshua waged war against all these kings for a long time. The conquest was not quick or easy, but required sustained military efforts over an extended period, likely several years. A significant theological observation appears in Joshua 11:19-20. Not a single city made peace with the Israelites. Except the Hivites living in Gibeon, all others were taken in battle, for it was the Lord himself who hardened their hearts to wage war against Israel, so that they might be utterly destroyed and show no mercy, but be annihilated, as the Lord had commanded Moses. This reflection explains why, apart from Gibeon, the Canaanite cities chose resistance over surrender, attributing their choice to a divine purpose in the context of judgment. A final and notable aspect of the conquest is found in Joshua 11:21-22. At that time Joshua came and exterminated the Anakites. No Anakites were left in the land of the Israelites. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did any survive. The Anakites were feared for their extraordinary height. 40 years earlier, the Israelite spies had said, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Numbers 13:33. Their defeat symbolized the fulfillment of God's promise that Israel could overcome even the most daunting enemies. The final summary appears in Joshua 11:23. So Joshua took the entire land, just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal divisions. Then the land had rest from war. This conclusion highlights three important themes. 1. The fulfillment of God's promises to Moses. 2. The allocation of the land among the tribes of Israel. And 3. The beginning of a period of peace after a long military campaign. The phrase, "the land had rest from war," marks the end of an era of active conquest and the beginning of a new chapter in Israel's story, the establishment and settlement in the Promised Land. The major battles were over. The key cities had been taken, and although some Canaanite resistance remained, as noted in Joshua 13:1-7, most of the territory was now under Israelite control. God's promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was being fulfilled before the eyes of this generation. After the great battles and conquests, the book of Joshua pauses to account for the victories. In Joshua 12:1 we read, "These are the kings of the land whom the Israelites defeated, and whose land they took over east of the Jordan, from the Arnon Gorge to Mount Hermon, including all the eastern Arabah." First, the text recalls the conquests under Moses before the crossing of the Jordan. In Joshua 12:2-3, Sihon, king of the Amorites, is mentioned. Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon. He ruled from Aroer on the rim of the Arnon Gorge, from the middle of the gorge to the Jabbok River, which is the border of the Ammonites. This included half of Gilead. His territory was vast, stretching from the Arnon in the south to the Jabbok in the north. The second king, defeated by Moses, was Og, mentioned in Joshua 12:4-5, and the territory of Og, king of Bashan, one of the last of the Rephaites, who reigned in Ashtaroth and Edrei. He ruled over Mount Hermon, Salekah, all of Bashan, to the border of the people of Geshur and Maacah, and half of Gilead, to the border of Sihon, king of Heshbon. Og was particularly feared, described as one of the last of the giants, Rephaim, and ruled the region of Bashan, north of Gilead. These lands conquered by Moses were given to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. As Joshua 12:6 reminds us, Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the Israelites conquered them, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave their land to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh to be their possession. The second part of the chapter lists the kings defeated by Joshua west of the Jordan. In Joshua 12:7-8, "These are the kings of the land that Joshua and the Israelites conquered on the west side of the Jordan, from Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon to Mount Halak, which rises toward Seir. Joshua gave their lands as an inheritance to the tribes of Israel according to their tribal divisions." The list that follows in Joshua 12:9-24 is striking. 31 kings defeated by Joshua and the Israelites. The king of Jericho, 1. The king of Ai, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, and so on, concluding with the king of Tirzah. In all, 31 kings. The list follows a roughly geographical order, starting with Jericho and Ai, the first cities conquered, then moving through the south, center, and finally the north of Canaan. This detailed record documented the scope of the conquests and would serve as a reference for the future division of the land. The total of 31 kings in a relatively small territory reflects the fragmented political structure of the region at the time, many small kingdoms or city-states rather than large, unified empires. Each name in this list represents a battle won, each city a conquest achieved, and together they stand as a testament to God's faithfulness in fulfilling His promises to Israel. The land promised to Abraham was finally being given to his descendants, exactly as God had said centuries earlier. Chapter 13 begins by acknowledging that, despite the great conquests, much land still remained to be taken. In Joshua 13:1, when Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, "You are now very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over." This statement marks an important transition. Joshua, the great warrior who had led so many victories, was now aging and would not complete the entire conquest in his lifetime. However, this did not imply failure, for in Joshua 13:6, God assures, I myself will drive them out before the Israelites. Be sure to allocate this land to Israel for an inheritance, as I have instructed you." Before beginning the description of the territorial division west of the Jordan, the text recaps the lands that Moses had already distributed east of the Jordan. In Joshua 13:8, the other half of the tribe of Manasseh, the Reubenites and the Gadites, had already received the inheritance that Moses gave them east of the Jordan, as he, the servant of the Lord, had assigned it to them. From this point on, the text describes in detail the territories of each Transjordanian tribe, starting with Reuben in the south. In Joshua 13:15-16, Moses had given to the tribe of Reuben according to its clans. Their territory extended from Aroer on the rim of the Arnon Gorge, and from the town in the middle of the gorge to the plain by Medeba. Reuben's territory lay in the southernmost part of the Transjordan, in what is today the plateau of Moab, east of the Dead Sea. It was a land rich in pasture, ideal for the tribe's herds. The text lists several key cities, including Heshbon, the former capital of King Sihon. Next, the inheritance of the tribe of Gad is described, north of Reuben. In Joshua 13:24-25, Moses had given to the tribe of Gad according to its clans. Their territory included Jazer, all the towns of Gilead, and half the land of the Ammonites, as far as Aroer, near Rabbah. Gad received the central region of the Transjordan, primarily the area of Gilead, known for its forests and rugged terrain. This territory stretched from the Jabbok in the south to near the Yarmuk in the north, including important cities like Gaza and Ramoth Gilead. Finally, the text describes the inheritance of the eastern half-tribe of Manasseh. In Joshua 13:29-30, Moses had given to the half-tribe of Manasseh. It was for the half-tribe of the descendants of Manasseh, according to its clans. The territory extended from Mahanaim and included all of Bashan, the entire realm of Og, king of Bashan, all the settlements of Jair in Bashan, 60 towns. The half-tribe of Manasseh received the northernmost territory of the Transjordan, the region of Bashan, known for its fertility. This land included the former kingdom of Og and stretched as far north as Mount Hermon. A notable detail appears in Joshua 13:22 regarding the death of Balaam. In addition to those slain in battle, the Israelites had put to the sword Balaam, son of Beor, who practiced divination. This mention connects the narrative with earlier events in the book of Numbers, recalling how God protected Israel from attempts at cursing them. The section concludes in Joshua 13:33 with an important observation. But to the tribe of Levi, Moses had given no inheritance. The Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance, as he promised them. This foundational principle, that the Levites would receive no territorial inheritance but serve the Lord, would be further developed later. Starting in chapter 14, the text describes how the land west of the Jordan River was divided among the remaining 9.5 tribes. In Joshua 14:1-2, we read, "These are the inheritances that the Israelites received in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the families of the Israelite tribes allotted to them." Their inheritance was assigned by lot, as the Lord had commanded through Moses. The process was overseen by both religious, Eleazar, and civil, Joshua, authority. The specific territory each tribe received was determined by lot, likely through the Urim and Thummim, sacred objects used to discern God's will, eliminating suspicion of human favoritism. Before the general casting of lots began, a special case was addressed: Caleb's request. In Joshua 14:6-9, he approaches Joshua and recalls a promise made by Moses 45 years earlier. "You know what the Lord said to Moses. On that day Moses swore to me, 'The land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly.'" Caleb had been one of the 12 spies sent to explore Canaan. While 10 discouraged the people with fearful reports about giants, only Caleb and Joshua remained confident in God's power to give them the land. As a reward, Moses promised Caleb the region he had explored. Now, at 85 years old, Caleb claims that promise. In Joshua 14:10-12, "Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive. And here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me. That day, you yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified." Caleb's vitality and courage are remarkable. He specifically requests the region inhabited by the feared Anakites, giants who had once terrified the other spies. Joshua honors his request in Joshua 14:13. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. After Caleb's case is resolved, the text outlines the borders of each tribe, beginning with Judah. Chapter 15 describes its boundaries, stretching from the desert of Zin in the south to the border with Benjamin in the north, and from the Dead Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. The next allotments went to Ephraim, chapter 16, and the western half of Manasseh, chapter 17. An interesting detail appears in Joshua 17:3-6, where the daughters of Zelophehad received their inheritance in accordance with Numbers 27, establishing a precedent for women's inheritance rights in the absence of male heirs. The descendants of Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh, feeling their territory was too small, voiced their complaint in Joshua 17:14. Joshua responded by encouraging them to clear forested areas and drive out the remaining Canaanites, showing a degree of flexibility in the initial distribution. After these distributions, the process continued at Shiloh in Joshua 18:1-1. The whole assembly of the Israelites gathered at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The tabernacle was established in this central location, which would remain Israel's main sanctuary for roughly 300 years. Noticing that 7 tribes had yet to receive their inheritance, Joshua took action in Joshua 18:4. "Appoint 3 men from each tribe. I will send them out to make a survey of the land and to write a description of it according to the inheritance of each." These 21 men mapped out the remaining territory, dividing it into 7 portions to be assigned by lot. Benjamin was the first of these 7 tribes to receive its land, Joshua 18:11-28, a small but strategically located territory between Judah and Ephraim. Next came Simeon, Joshua 19:1-9, with a unique feature. Their inheritance was within the territory of Judah, fulfilling the prophecy that Simeon would be scattered in Jacob, Genesis 49:7. The remaining tribes, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan, received their portions in Joshua 19:10-48, mainly in the central and northern parts of Canaan. Finally, in Joshua 19:49-50, when they had finished dividing the land into its allotted portions, the Israelites gave Joshua son of Nun an inheritance among them, Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim. Like Caleb, Joshua received a special portion, but significantly, he waited until all the other tribes had received theirs first, showing his selflessness. Joshua 19:51 concludes, "These are the inheritances that Eleazar the priest, Joshua's son, of Nun, and the heads of the tribal clans of Israel allotted by lot at Shiloh." And so they finished dividing the land. With the major territorial distribution complete, 2 special arrangements were established: the cities of refuge and the Levitical cities, essential for social justice and religious life. In Joshua 20:1-2, God commands, "Appoint the cities of refuge, as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person unintentionally and without malice aforethought may flee there." In that era, when someone was killed, the nearest male relative of The victim, the avenger of blood, was expected to avenge the death. The cities of refuge provided temporary safety for those who had killed unintentionally. Joshua 20:4-6 outlines the procedure. When they flee to one of these cities, they are to stand in the entrance of the city gate and state their case. And they shall remain in that city until they have stood trial before the assembly and until the death of the high priest serving at that time. Then they may return to their own home. 6 cities were designated, strategically located. In Joshua 27:8 we read, "So they set apart Kadesh in Galilee, Shechem and Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, east of the Jordan. They designated Bezer, Ramoth in Gilead, and Golan in Bashan. 3 cities lay west of the Jordan, Kadesh in the north, Naphtali, Shechem in the center, Ephraim, and Hebron in the south, Judah. East of the Jordan were Bezer in the south, Reuben, Ramoth. In the center, Gad, and Golan in the north, eastern Manasseh. This arrangement ensured that no one in Israel was more than a day's journey from a refuge. Next, the text addresses the Levitical cities. Unlike the other tribes, Levi received no contiguous territory. In Joshua 21:1-2, the Levites approached Eleazar and Joshua, saying, "The Lord commanded through Moses that you give us towns to live in, with pasture lands for our livestock." The Levites were granted 48 cities spread throughout Israel, along with surrounding pasture lands. This dispersion ensured that the teaching of the law and the performance of religious duties were accessible across all regions. These cities were distributed among the 3 main clans of Levi, as explained in Joshua 21:4-7. The lot came out for the families of the Kohathites, to the rest of the descendants of Kohath, to the sons of Gershon, to the sons of Merari. The priestly Kohathites, descendants of Aaron, received 13 cities within the southern tribes, Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. The other Kohathites were allotted 10 cities in Ephraim, Dan, and western Manasseh. The Gershonites received 13 cities, primarily in the north, while the Merarites were given 12 cities in Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun. An interesting detail is that the 6 cities of refuge were also Levitical cities, a logical combination, since the Levites, being well-versed in the law, could ensure fair trials for those seeking asylum. This section concludes with a powerful statement about divine faithfulness in Joshua 21:43-45. "So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had, sworn to give their ancestors, and they took possession of it and settled there. Not one of all the Lord's good promises to Israel failed. Everyone was fulfilled." This declaration marks the climax of the conquest and land distribution narrative. After centuries of waiting since the first promise to Abraham, the people of Israel were finally established in the Promised Land. The battles had been won, the territory divided, and social and religious institutions put in place. God's faithfulness was evident in every part of Israel's experience. With the land distribution completed, the tribes that had received territory east of the Jordan, Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, were ready to return to their families. In Joshua 22:1-4, Joshua summons them and acknowledges their faithful commitment to helping their fellow Israelites. "You have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed me in everything I commanded you. Now return to your homes, to the land of your possession." Joshua sends them off with a final exhortation in Joshua 22:5. "But be very careful to keep the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." The tribes depart, but when they reach the Jordan region, they take an action that nearly triggers a civil war. Joshua 22:10 says, "When they came to the region of the Jordan, they built an imposing altar there by the Jordan." When the Western tribes heard about this, they interpreted it as an act of apostasy, building an alternative altar to the one at the tabernacle in Shiloh. Their response in Joshua 22:12 was intense. When the Israelites heard of this, the whole assembly gathered at Shiloh to go to war against them. However, before taking any action, they sent a delegation led by Phinehas, the son of the high priest, along with 10 tribal leaders. In Joshua 22:16, the delegation confronts them. How could you break faith with the God of Israel like this? How could you turn away from the Lord and build yourselves an altar in rebellion against him? Now, they reminded them of past acts of unfaithfulness, such as the sin of Peor and the sin of Achan, which had brought divine punishment on the entire nation. In Joshua 22:18, they warned, "And are you now turning away from the Lord? If you rebel against the Lord today, tomorrow he will be angry with the whole community of Israel." They even offered a generous alternative in Joshua 22:19. "If the land you possess is defiled, come over to the Lord's land, where the Lord's tabernacle stands, and share the land with us. But do not rebel against the Lord or against us." By building an altar other than the altar of the Lord our God, the Eastern tribes' response in Joshua 22:21-29 revealed a major misunderstanding. They explained the altar wasn't built for sacrifices, but as a memorial. "We did not build it for burnt offerings or sacrifices, but as a witness between us and you and the generations after us, so that your descendants might not say to us, 'What do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel?' That is why we said, 'Let us build an altar, not for burnt offerings or sacrifices, but as a witness between us and you and the generations that follow.'" Their concern was valid. Separated by the Jordan River, the Eastern tribes feared that future generations might view them as outsiders to the community of Israel. The altar would serve as a visible testimony of their belonging to God's people, regardless of geography. Phinehas and the delegation were satisfied with this explanation. Joshua 22:30-31 records, "When Phinehas the priest and the leaders of the community heard what Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh had to say, they were pleased. And Phinehas said, 'Today we know that the Lord is with us, because you have not been unfaithful to him in this matter. You have rescued the Israelites from the Lord's hand.'" The crisis was peacefully resolved thanks to open communication and a willingness to listen before acting rashly. Joshua 22:34 concludes, "And the Reubenites and Gadites gave the altar this name, a witness between us, that the Lord is God." The Hebrew word ed means precisely witness or testimony. This episode underscores the importance of national and religious unity for Israel, as well as the dangers of misunderstandings and hasty judgment. At the same time, it highlights how clear communication and a readiness to hear one another can prevent unnecessary conflict. The final chapters of the book contain Joshua's farewell speeches and the account of his death. Joshua 23:1-2 sets the scene. After a long time had passed, and the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies, Joshua, by then a very old man, summoned all Israel, their elders, leaders, judges, and officials. In his first address, chapter 23, Joshua reminds the people of what God had done and warns against the dangers of unfaithfulness. In Joshua 23:3-5, he recalls the divine victories. "You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. The Lord your God himself will drive them out of your way. He will push them out before you, and you will take possession of their land, as the Lord your God promised you." Joshua then exhorts the people to remain faithful in Joshua 23:6-8. Be very strong to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, so that you do not turn aside from it to the right or to the left, but you shall hold fast to the Lord your God, as you have done to this day. He also warns them of the consequences of disobedience in Joshua 23:12-13. If you turn away and ally yourselves with the survivors of these nations, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, scourges on your backs and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land that the Lord your God has given you. The speech concludes with a solemn reminder of God's faithfulness and the seriousness of his warnings in Joshua 23:14-16. Now I am about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Just as all the good things the Lord your God promised you have come to pass, so the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things, if you violate the covenant of the Lord your God. In chapter 24, Joshua summons a final assembly at Shechem, a location of great historical importance, where Abraham first received the promise in the land of Canaan. As recorded in Joshua 24:1, then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel. At Shechem, he summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. In this second speech, Joshua delivers a historical overview, beginning with Terah, the father of Abraham. In Joshua 24:2-13, he recounts the story of salvation from Abraham's call, through the bondage in Egypt, the Exodus, the wilderness journey, and finally, the conquest of the Promised Land. This retelling underscores God's unwavering faithfulness despite the repeated failures of the people. Joshua then issues a decisive challenge in Joshua 24:14-15. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him. In sincerity and truth, throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. The people respond with renewed commitment in Joshua 24:16-18. Far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. We too will serve the Lord, because he is our God. Joshua warns them that this commitment must not be made lightly in Joshua 24:19-20. You are not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins if you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods. He will turn and bring disaster upon you after he has been good to you. When the people insist on their resolution, Joshua formalizes the covenant renewal in Joshua 24:25-27. On that day, Joshua made a covenant for the people, and there he set them statutes and ordinances in Shechem. He took a large stone and set it up there. See, he said to all the people, this stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord said to us. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God. After this final great act of leadership, Joshua died. Joshua 24:29-30 records, after these things, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. The book ends with two more significant events. First, the burial of Joseph's bones, which had been brought from Egypt as he had requested centuries earlier. Joshua 24:32 says, Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the plot of land that Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver. This became the inheritance of Joseph's descendants. This symbolic act connected the end of the conquest to the promises made to the patriarchs. Joseph who had died in Egypt, firmly believed that one day his people would return to the Promised Land. His burial in Shechem, on land bought by his father Jacob, marked the completion of a historical cycle that began with Israel's descent into Egypt during the famine over 400 years earlier. The second event was the death of Eleazar, the high priest. Joshua 24:33 tells us, "And Eleazar son of Aaron died and was buried at Gibeah, the town of his son Phinehas, which had been given to him in the hill country of Ephraim." Eleazar had been a constant companion to Joshua during the conquest and the land's distribution. His death marked the close of an era. His burial in the hill country of his son Phinehas signified the continuity of the priesthood and a transition to a new generation of leadership. With these final words, the book of Joshua comes to a close. The generation that conquered the promised land had completed its mission. Moses, Joshua, and Eleazar, the great leaders of the Exodus and the conquest, had all passed on. The nation of Israel was now firmly established in the land, with defined borders, organized institutions, and a renewed covenant with God. The events recorded in the book of Joshua represent the fulfillment of divine promises made centuries earlier to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The journey that began with Abraham's call to leave his homeland had finally reached its intended destination, a great nation settled in the Promised Land, ready to be a blessing to all nations as part of God's original plan. If you were blessed by this series on the book of Joshua, don't keep it to yourself. Help us spread God's word by clicking the subscribe button and turning on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming Bible series. Share this video with friends and family who need to hear these life-changing truths. Also, drop a comment below telling us which part of this story touched your heart the most. Your experience might inspire others to dive deeper into Scripture. See you in the next Bible study, where we'll keep discovering the wonders of God's Word together.